Okay, let's call this meeting to order. Thank you for all being here. I know we had a long day yesterday, but this is an important topic and excited to get ready. Madam Clerk, can we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll let you do that in chambers if you would, please.
And under God,
We're missing your
indivisible,
flags, Jimmy.
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk.
All right, Mr. Vice Mayor, first item on your agenda today is roll call for the Reno City Council. Breckus,
Here.
Dewar,
Here.
Delgado. He is on the phone. We're just trying to transfer him over. Weber,
Here.
Jordan,
Here.
Reese,
Here.
and Shivi is absent. Mr. Vice Mayor, you do have a quorum of the Reno City Council. At this time, transitioning to your first agenda item, which is public comment. This public comment section is identified for general public comment for items not pertaining to a specific item on your agenda today. We received, as a reminder to council and everyone else, any comments submitted after 4 p.m. yesterday will be moved to the closing public comment period. Will be heard at that time. Additionally, that information will be sent to council and as part of the official record. We did receive one voicemail from Andrew Poe. At this time, Mr. Vice Mayor, we will play the voicemail so that way council may hear it and it will be entered into the official record.
This is Pastor Andrew Poe, pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Reno. I just wanted to make a public comment regarding the sewer situation. I know there's a meeting on that July 30th. I was shocked that our sewer rate has increased by nearly 1,000%. We were paying a flat rate of $146.40 per quarter, but this last quarter we received a bill for $1,454.60. We were not given any notice of those changes, and we certainly did not budget for that as a church. And so I would just encourage any legislation that's changing the sewer situation to take into account the hurt, the damage that's being done to good organizations such as churches through increases in cost. Thank you for considering this.
Mr. Vice Mayor, with that, we have no further general public comment, and we would be transitioning to approval of your agenda at this time.
Okay, before we do that, I think yesterday we received a number of comments that might have really been about sewer. I know, for example, that Mr. Samuelson had sent in public comments that were about sewer, and so it might have been just some confusion about where they belonged. So I just want to acknowledge for the record that I did receive public comments that were related to sewer, and I did read them. His were supportive generally, but were related to sizing and distance from sewer and fee-related concepts. But I just note that for the record so the public understands. We do read all the public comment we receive in whatever format or medium that they're given. Councilmember Breckus, did you have a comment?
Yes, at 9:56 a.m., the council was sent public comment by a Ward 1 constituent, and I'm going to take the chance to use his public comment and express it in my own words because it's very important to me, and it's an issue that I think needs a lot of attention. And several areas in West Reno, including the South Hampton Estates 2 area where I live, remain on septic tanks despite having been annexed into the city of Reno for decades. Even the newest of the affected homes, still on septic were built some 40 years ago. Shortly after being brought into the city, we received notices that public health concerns demanded the sewer system be expanded to include the area, but with all expenses to be assessed to the homes. At the public hearing, I spoke on behalf of the residents and made the point, having experienced the same issue in 3 other states with respect to property that I own, that the way such issues are customarily handled is to require homeowners to pay for the connection from their homes to the system in the adjacent street if they agree to connect with the initial installation, and to assess greater expenses to any homeowners that elect to delay connection. Suddenly, the public health concerns seemed to evaporate and no more was heard about the issue. That notwithstanding, the city has continued to refuse building permits for some lots based on its purported health concerns associated with the septic systems, and has sent notices to some residents where questions about the original approvals for installed septic systems have come up in the review of former county health department documents. The septic systems are now generally 40 to 60 years old, which means that the expected operational lifespans for those systems is already past, and adverse effects on public health are imminent. It is thus clear beyond peradventure that individual septic systems will soon begin to produce real public health issues, and residents will thus confront the need to replace systems. I also note that it was construction of the Collin Ranch area south and east of Southampton Estates 2 that made us an island of county in the first instance, and that all homes in the immediately adjoining Collin Ranch area to the south have existing sewer access. It is obvious that the best course of action will be for the city to address this issue in a prophylactic way, allowing time for planning and budgeting rather than waiting until the pressure of an existing health crisis is extant. I'm therefore asking that you undertake action to work expansion to the city sewer system into the West Reno Islands. Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, for allowing me to read this public comment. That's my word.
Thank you. And if you would please send that to Madam Clerk and to me. I didn't receive it, so I would just appreciate that.
She got it. She got it. She'll send it on.
Councilmember
Okay, thank you
Breckus,
so much.
if you can resend it to me, I'm not seeing that has not come through my email, and I've also checked with our chief deputy, and she also has not received that. So if you could forward it to us, then I can ensure it's in the record and all council will receive
Okay.
it.
It went to cityclerk@cityofreno.com. Is
That's
that the
why.
email address?
Yeah, our email
Okay.
address, just for the record, is cityclerk@reno.gov for any
Okay.
comments coming in.
Okay, I'll forward it to you then. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda at this time, please?
So moved, Jordan. Second, Dewar.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously.
This time, Mr. Vice Mayor, transitioning to item B1. This is a presentation, discussion, and potential direction on the sewer utility. This will be
Okay,
presented to
before we
you.
bring in our staff, Ms. Attorney, I appreciate that. Let me just share with the body that obviously we're down a member. This meeting was not originally planned, and so it came along, and so there were some pre-existing conflicts. I will say we may have an issue holding quorum, and as a result of that, I'm going to try to keep everyone pretty strictly to time limits and understand that our goal is to have completed our meeting sometime around the 1 o'clock hour. So it means we won't be taking any breaks, but if you need to step away for a moment, please do so. Just make sure that your mic is muted, and then you can turn off your camera if you need to. But again, understand we just have an issue of some quorum related issues toward the end, and it's an important, very important topic. And I know there will be a lot of questions, but just understand where we are in terms of timing. Mr. Flansburgh, welcome and good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me well.
We can hear you well, but we're looking at your ceiling and like one eyeball. So I don't know if your camera seems to be doing something that it normally does not do.
All right, then. Interesting. I've got the wrong camera.
Okay, well, there you
All
are.
right.
And now we're, yeah.
Okay, I can see the problem. We had a problem with the microphone, so I had a new camera brought up, but I was going to use the existing camera and not this one. So one moment.
No problem. The floor is yours.
Okay, this is going to be this is what we were trying to avoid. Okay. Let me see if I can bring this. Video. Start video.
We're just about there.
Okay. Can everyone see that okay? I've got to kind of hold the microphone or the camera.
You do?
Yeah, we can see you, but we know that the presentations are the key part. So let's focus on that. And then if we don't get to see your beautiful face, we'll be okay. Appreciate you.
I do have a face made for radio, so I can appreciate that. I was going to start today, and for those of you who know me for a long time, as I am now, I was going to put my face mask on for those I've only met in the last few months. But hopefully we'll get through this, and it will be in good shape. And today I want to talk about the sewer utility, and primarily we all know this, but in times of this pandemic, one of the most key things, important things we have is sanitation. And so clean water, access to clean water, and access to sewer, where we take the water, treat it, and release it back in the atmosphere. And we cannot decrease the importance of that. Today, just to kind of laser focus in on what we want to talk about, I just want to give an overview of the sewer utility. I want to discuss the financial status and our treatment plant capacity. We're going to discuss our capital improvement program items that we have in place. And then we have a policy question. And that's this policy question that should the city of Reno and Washoe County exchange customers and potential collections facilities in the streamlining administration of the sewer service. We'll get into that in a moment. The second item is the stormwater utility implementation in the policy decision. Shall we continue with the implementation based on today's world? And then finally, we have our sewer user fee and connection fee rate study results, which Far West Engineering will be presenting on. And with that overview, in the past year, I would like to say there was the Calvary Church. I'm thinking that there was a billing glitch, and so I will certainly look into that. It looks like the decimal was moved one. So we'll look into that to find out what happened with our billing group in finance. So that seemed very odd. There were no changes to our sewer rates quarter to quarter. Those changes occur always on October 1st, raised by Consumer Price Index for inflation. So in the most recent year, these are unaudited revenues, but just because there'll be some revenues that trickle in for the previous year and obviously some expenses as well. Primarily, we are funded through the user fees and that come in. And so that's $78.3 million. Our
Don, are you
expenses,
trying to show us? Are you trying to show us a presentation?
I am. Can you not see that?
No.
Yeah, it was there, and then when we changed to talking about your screen or your camera, it went away.
All right.
So John, all you'll need to do is hover over Zoom on your side and you can share your screen. And then that will remove the camera component and transition over to sharing the presentation from your desktop.
All right.
You
Great
get
job.
it.
Can we see that now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. Why do we call these user fees? I thought they were rates.
Oh.
When you're talking about utilities, usually you talk about rates and rate payers.
Yeah, you're right. I believe in our ordinances, we talk about user fees, but these are rates, charges, fees. I know there's slight differences in them, but they are the fee to the user, the rate to the user for the service. So this is a fee for service type of operation. And so then again, just back here, so we have a few questions specifically that we were that we wanted to get some direction on today. We aren't really expecting that we're going to take action per se today. We're just really trying to get the information out there and receive direction to bring items back to you at future council meetings. So going into the slides, I'll begin again here. Our sewer user fee revenue primarily is the revenue that we receive. In here, there's some other monies that come in from the connection fee side because we pay for our capital projects out of this fund, and it's also debt service that comes from the connection fee into this fund for paying out debt service that we have. So it shows up. It's a little bit of just how the counting works. But you can see that primarily in the expenses, 41% service and supplies. Well, 15 million of that overall amount in service and supplies is for the operation of TMWRF. So it comes out of the service and supplies side. So it looks like a big number in service and supplies, but it's really our portion, our pro rata share of operating TMWRF, our largest wastewater treatment plant. And then, of course, the capital outlay for our capital projects.
Question.
Yes.
I'm looking and have been looking for some time for these two pies to be a little more detailed. The charges for services, including user fees on the revenue side, I've always been asking and wanting to see how many of those come in for connection and how many are rates. And I don't see that broken down on this slide, do I?
Great question, Councilmember Breckus. This is all user fees. This is all rates. This is for paying for the treatment, the maintenance and operations, and replacement of our sewer system. And then the next slide, we'll talk about connection fees.
Okay, I guess my thinking is, from the policy board that needs to make policy decisions, it's good to have the data because rates are things that, say, my 60, 70-year-old house pays every quarter. But connection fees are one-time fees that the 1 million square foot industrial building up instead pays. And I think that if we are going to be examining and understanding how much, existing customers pay, how much new customers pay for the outlay, we really need that tickled down a little bit further. And then on the outlay side, similarly, you talk about capital outlay and services and supplies. How much cost is involved for STED, TMWRF, and then STUMWRF? I've been trying to see that also. And then how much is related to the stormwater function?
Councilmember Breckus, I'm just going to remind you, it is a workshop, so I want us to have some flexibility, but we also have to get through the presentations, and each of the members have questions. So if you have questions that can be held to the end of it, I would appreciate if you would do that. Or if you need additional time outside of this public meeting with our staff, we can make that happen. But the problem is if we get into every one of these small items, we won't make the agendized issues that we have to get through within the time that we have.
Well, and I appreciate that you're the presiding officer and you have a certain, power authority to manage the meeting how you want. For me in a workshop setting, particularly if you're looking at 30 slides, I like the free-flowing ability of going forward. May I ask Mr. Landsberg how many slides you have in this first component?
I think there's 15.
Yeah.
And some of these are pretty quick slides.
And so it is harder to get through if we stop every minute to talk about every slide. So to the extent that you can, because you know this issue very well, and your intelligent, thoughtful approach to it is going to be important to your colleagues. Let's just see if we can get into the meat of it before we start on all of the sort of the micro level issues.
I'm sorry, I've been waiting a year for this, so I'm very excited.
Totally
to
understand.
get a little detailed. Okay.
And I need your input. Your input is going to be super valuable to me. I just want to see if we can't get into a bit more of the meat of it, and then perhaps the questions will come naturally from that. Mr. Flansburgh, can you pick up?
Absolutely, and it's good to take one step back here and just discuss, of course, the cost costs that we have in the expense side here for user fees, I mentioned, is for maintenance, for the operations, for the treatment cost. Treatment is about 40% of our cost on operations overall, or of the budget of user fees coming in. What's important to note is we only have TMWRF expenses here, which comes in as the service and supply. It's a big part of that pie. We also have the Reno Stead, which is portion of service and supplies for those parts that we buy to replace, and then labor and our equipment side is included in here as well, because that's an operation that the city of Reno operates. South Truckee Meadows is actually Washoe County plant. So we take revenues in, but then we pass through those revenues over to Washoe County. So there's no expenses here for South Truckee Meadows plant. We don't have the same agreement because it's not a joint facility like we have with the Truckee Meadows plant. So it's a different process. We are only passing through the fee through them, which is something I want to get into a little bit more as we get towards the latter part of this item. But I think it's very important to know that all existing businesses, even the new businesses, once they go online and start using the service, are going to pay the user fee. The connection fee is just the one-time fee that they have to pay to connect to the system. And so we can very much separate out our capital program to show what are those capacity projects that need to be built to allow additional capacity into the system, whether that's in our the collection system, the piping system that brings it to the plant, whether we have to do something at our lift station to take on the additional volume and that incremental amount included, and then of course incremental improvements at the treatment plants to expand. And in the case of the Reno Stead plant right now, not so incremental. I mean, we're doubling the size of that plant. So I think that it's important to know that that's where those expenses go. And so when comments are made that the user fee folks are going to be, paying into for the expansion, that isn't actually what happens. It's the connection fee side, that new development that comes in. So with that, here's on the connection fee side. This past year, we took in $14 million with connection fees. And then you can see our expenses was 4.4. The debt service there looks like a big piece of this pie. Of course, I guess it would have been better if the pie would have been smaller to show the 4.4 versus the 14. So I want to make sure that you don't see those as money in, money out. But that 4.4, 2.5 of that is for debt service, and that was existing debt service we had on the books for the TMWRF, some of the TMWRF expansion bonds that are in place. Obviously, that number is going to go up with the expansion of the Reno Stead plant. Again, we'll have connection fee and we'll have debt service in place there. So this is where it lies. It lies within this fund. It's a part of the sewer fund, but this is an account within that sewer fund that we separate the connection fees from the user fees. Councilmember Breckus had asked a question, and we want to make sure that we could answer it at this meeting. She asked about the 1,000 homes in 120 days and what's that impact to the sewer connection fee. Well, it has an impact to our cash because we're going to get those payments over a longer period of time. Just to be clear, this doesn't reduce payments. It only defers the payment into the sewer connection fee side account, and that is the impact. So we just placed here what we anticipate based on the projects that have come in and timing of when they were built. And I'm not expecting that everybody can zero focus in on the lines as much as just to say, here's that information that was asked. It's a deferral program. We're stretching those payments out over time. So it does have effect on our cash balance, but it does not have effect on the overall payment. The overall payment is the same.
But excuse me, Mr. Chair, is the totals the same, just so we understand? At the end of the day, without and with the deferral, at the end of the day, it should total the same, right?
It is the exact same payment. As I said, this does not reduce any of the payments for connecting to the sewer. It only defers the payment when the payment is due.
Okay, thank you.
And then this slide is worth spending a little bit of time on. We went back to fiscal year 06 and kind of show in the blue is the revenues and the red are the expenses over time. We had some expansion work that was going on in 07, 08, 09. And so there was at TMWRF, and so there was some additional expenses at that point. The green line is our cash balance. And this is the sewer fund overall. I didn't separate out user and connection. This is the overall sewer fund. And so it looks like currently we're at this apex of the green line. We have a fairly large cash balance. I put that into play though, only to show that we also have a very large capital program coming forward as our system is aging and we need to replace pipes and lift station work, and we'll get into that discussion as well. But just showing where we stand on the cash balance, where we've been over time, and then obviously the very large expenses coming forward in 21, 22, 23, 24. Those are Reno Stead and TMWRF projects anticipated. So there's a fair amount, as well as our other projects. And I'll go into more detail on a future slide of the breakout of the types of projects that we're doing. But I thought this was a good slide to show both history and also what we see in the future. Capacity is always a big item that we want to be able to discuss. And so looking at our flow splits, and this is those on the Joint Coordinating Committee or observed there know that we talk about this because our operational costs at TMWRF are based on the percentage of flow from both Sparks and Reno. So we measure those. I thought it might be just a little bit interesting to see what the impact of COVID has been as you look at the February, March numbers for Reno, for instance, and see how we started to go down. We have a lot of tourism that would come into play here that hasn't been in play. And so we've seen a reduction in the flows coming into the plant. Of course, we've had people working from home perhaps more, or people being at home. And so that can have an effect also. And if you look at the Sparks line, they kind of flattened out and actually now have seen a little bit tick upwards in their overall flow. But it's very interesting to note on the permitted capacity of TMWRF. If you look at the blue, that's the allocated capacity for Reno of the share that we own. The green is the unallocated capacity. That's the capacity we have remaining at TMWRF in play. The red or orange color is Sparks, what they've allocated, and then that yellow sliver remaining is what there's unallocated. So as you can tell, Sparks is getting a lot closer to hitting their allocation than Reno, and I think that this graph kind of depicts that well as we see, where they are and how we increase capacity for them that they can continue to build in their section and system of the overall system. At Reno Stead, we have the 2 million permitted capacity. We also have the flow shave to TMWRF of 500,000 for the total capacity of 2.5. We just recently allocated over the 2 million. So you had set aside 75,000 gallons of the flow shave as a starting point. We've allocated 2.01, so we're 11,000 gallons into that 500,000 flow shave. We've got 64,000 gallons remaining that has not been allocated, and then of course we have 425,000 gallons remaining due to the flow shave. And so just think it's good for you to see what that looks like. I imagine that we'll be coming back and asking you at a future council meeting about maybe releasing a little bit more of that flow shave capacity for additional expansion in Reno Stead area. I also wanted to show you the inflow we've had for the past 12 months. And again, kind of looking at those March, April numbers, you can see where they bumped up just a little bit and kind of been hovering there steady. Even though we've allocated 2.011, so 2,011,000 gallons, we're only seeing about 1.75 gallons in the front door at this point, because when you allocate sewer capacity, that's for construction that's going on into the future. So, but just thought it would be good for you to see kind of how our inflow is working at Reno Stead, as I showed you the inflows for the TMWRF plant. Finally, wanted to talk a little bit about, you've seen this graph many, many times. We moved the scale up a little bit. The bottom of the lake is about 2 feet below where this graph is, but what I wanted to show is that we are definitely seeing a drop due to the Swan Lake, the dewatering project that we put into place and has been active over this agricultural season. Just running quick numbers and comparing Swan and Silver Lake, you can see that Swan Lake has gone down further I'm sharing with you in the narrative that it's gone down further. And when you calculate what the volume of that would be, it calculates roughly at 244 million gallons. Our pumping numbers and meter shows 241, so very closely correlates to the additional drop that we've seen at Swan Lake due to that we can attribute directly to the pumping project that's in place. And of course, although it's nice to look at graphs.
Before you go back, can
Yes.
you go back to that graph? Just can you, before we leave it, just tell us what it is? I mean, the green is what, the orange is what, the blue is what?
Oh, thank you. The blue is the actual elevation of the lake over time. And so when we began measuring that back in 2017, and then you can see as the blue line goes up and down, those are cycles of winter, summer. A lot of that occurs through evaporation. In the most recent dropping, it's evaporation. That's the biggest driver we have up there, but it's also, we're showing that we're getting an incremental increase due to the pumping that's going on. The green bars represent inches of precipitation, and those are over storm events. And so if you look to the right side of the graph, the long line that's all by itself, that was a summer, July 2019 thunder boomer type of storm that came in. That was just a little over 1.5 inches of precipitation from that one storm. But you can see how sparse the lines have been over the last fourth of this graph on the bottom, and that just shows how very little precipitation we received in this past year. We had a below normal precipitation year.
What's the orange?
And then the orange line that's as far as we believe we're going to be able to pump. We're based on where our current intake is of the pumping for the American Flat. We think that orange line is the elevation that we'll be able to still pull water from the lake. And then once you get to that point, you're only sitting at about 3.5 feet of water overall in the lake. And I'll show you in the next picture. You can see the difference in the upper left of the pump inlet on April 15th as compared to the pump inlet on July 21st. You can see how far the water's receded, just how much that the lake has gone down because the overall depth of the lake, it's not a bowl, it's not a flat dish, it's more of a bowl. And so as the elevation goes down, it recedes further and further in. And then just thought I would share with you some pictures of the American Flat Farming Project. They received their first cutting of hay and have their and are continuing with that project. They hope to get at least 3 cuttings this year. So I just want to share with you that I would consider this was something that the council gave us direction to move forward with, and I would say it's been very successful. Finally, just on North Valleys is just kind of a refresher here. We've got the agricultural use in place. We have the feasibility study that was completed at American Flat for the aquifer storage and recovery, and we also are working on that pilot project at Reno Stead. We will be injecting water at Reno Stead, near Reno Stead, in that pilot project in September and October. We'll be pulling that water back out in November to again demonstrate to Nevada Department of Environmental Protection our ability to treat to the A+ standard, to inject, and then to pull back out. And that all goes into the larger project that we look at in American Flat in order to do the same thing. What's very beneficial here is we'll have the ability to do the direct injection into American Flat and then pull it back out and use it on the American Flat farm, not pulling water out of the lake at that point when the lake is low. And we'll have the ability to then continue our testing and prove up that water source into the goals and objectives of One Water Nevada, which is to turn it into a potable source for drought resistance and give us greater flexibility. And of course, we also have the reservoir system, and the reservoir system that being built just gives us expanded use of effluent that we'll be able to use, and Councilmember Breckus has often referred to that as our purple pipe system. We have our effluent in a purple pipe to distinguish it from our potable water in blue pipe. And then just as we've studied this for quite some time, it's not easy just to say it's going to always be this or always be that. We've got to look at the lake management plan. So the further we're getting into this, we really need to look at that lake. What is the elevation of the lake over time? Are we in drought situations where the lake is going to, we can't just not, I don't believe we're going to get to a spot where we never want to put effluent in the lake, because we're going to want to make sure we keep the wetlands viable there during drought periods of time. However, in wet periods of time, having these other options to take effluent and manage that is really going to be key in our effluent management plan. Finally, just a big picture here of the capital improvement program. And as you see the different colors here, and this mirrors what we were showing in the expenses and revenues. If you look at the blue is all of the collection system. So that's our older pipe. That is either going in and doing a dig and replace. It could be going in and doing a lining of existing to give it that extra 40 years, 50 years of life. The orange is also part of our collection system, but we distinguish it separately because those are our large lift stations. And you can see in FY21 a larger piece of the orange. That is reflective of the Golden Valley lift station and other lift station improvements. We had a analysis completed by Brown and Caldwell to look at all of our lift stations and do a condition analysis, and we have a program which is where this is informed on the orange section for the lift station maintenance and repair and replacement and upsizing. The gray is storm drain stormwater projects. We currently only schedule a certain amount of money for storm drain. As you can imagine, the sewer utility, we're primarily focused on sewer, but we obviously also have the storm drain. And so we have a fairly modest program. Of course, we want to make sure we keep our permit active and meet all the requirements of that. City of Reno is the lead in the region for our non-point source MPDES permits. And so we want to keep that going, but we don't have a lot of funding for stormwater projects, so within the existing CIP, and so that's why we've also talked about a stormwater utility. In the yellow, you'll see the TMWRF expansion or projects that go in, and these could both be expansion to help with capacity as well as rehab and rehabilitation. You can see over the last 5 years, we've had a fairly consistent, some more in fiscal year 16 on the first bar, fairly consistent over the last 4 years. We see that going up a little bit in the next couple of years, and then the next bigger expansion project out at TMWRF. And then the green is our Reno Stead expansion. And you can see we had very little green in previous years leading up to this, but obviously now it's the big expansion for Reno Stead, and that's why we have so much there. And then finally, the purple is our effluent. It's the reuse system, and so we use the purple color like the purple pipe. And then finally, just again looking at the big picture of our overall sewer service, you have the South Truckee Meadows plant in the gray at the bottom of the screen. You've got the big pink colored area. That's the Truckee Meadows Water Reclamation Facility. That's the central, what we call central. On the far left is in the darker pink or purple is Lawton Verdi. That also drains to the Truckee Meadows plant, but there's kind of a break line there that was included as part of the Lawton Verdi interceptor, and that'll be important for the discussion at the end of the meeting with Far West on their alternatives. And then if you look to the north, you've got the red is the Lemon Valley Wastewater Treatment Facility, and blue is the Reno Stead. We did a joint facility plan with Washoe County on both the Lemon Valley and Reno Stead plants. And when we did that, the recommendation that came out was to look at decommissioning the Lemon Valley Wastewater Treatment Plant. Of course, Washoe County will need to make that consideration, but it would be possible that if that is something they would look to do, they would come to us. They would need to pay our connection fee to tie into the Reno Stead plant and build a pump station down by their plant to pump the sewage up to our plant for treatment. But this gives you a delineation of the sewer sheds for the Reno Sparks area. And then of course, Sparks is the kind of the peach color in the northwest. And so the question that we have that's come up is we've had some agreements in place for a while. And those agreements talk about, for instance, specifically in South Truckee Meadows, we have a lot of customers. I want to say we're around 16,000 customers in South Truckee Meadows, residents and businesses. We take in the Reno fee and we turn around and pay Washoe County their fee for that area. Embedded into our cost is the stormwater utility. We don't capture enough difference to pay for, well, I say stormwater utility, the stormwater component. We don't capture enough cost from that to even capture that stormwater component. And obviously under stormwater utility, we would have a certain amount of fee that would need to be collected from all residents, not just tied to a sewer bill. But in this particular instance, we find that collecting those fees for those businesses and residents, and then turning around and paying that to Washoe County, and then Washoe County capturing, say, Hidden Valley, Lawton Verdi, Collin Ranch, the folks that drain into the Truckee Meadows system for ours, they capture that rate and pass it over to us. We find that that is overly administratively cumbersome. And so we, and for this item, would just ask for some direction. If you would like City of Reno staff to work with Washoe County staff to see what would exchange of ownership of customers and certain sewer, piping, what would that look like? We take on the maintenance of those items, but then you are responsible for all of the system that drains to your wastewater treatment plant. The sewer system's a closed system. You capture the waste and you collect it and bring it down to the central point for treatment. And so it just would allow for you to have that control of your overall system regardless of jurisdiction. And similar to the Cold Springs agreement or the Stonegate agreement that we brought to council, where Washoe County will have the facilities and that drain to their plant, and we'll just treat them generally in terms of working in the right of way like we would treat our other utilities like Truckee Meadows Water Authority. So that is what, that is the question or direction here, and that is my overview of your stormwater, of your sewer utility.
Thank you, Mr. Flansburgh, for the presentation. Before we go to our colleagues, I'll sort of build upon what you just said. In this portion of our meeting, you're asking a very specific policy question about whether or not this pass-through system that we have kind of cobbled together over the years is worth continuing, or whether, in fact, we should ask staff to get together with the staff of the other affected entities and try to figure out a new and better mousetrap. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Thank you.
Okay, so I understood the presentation, and so I'm going to start with colleagues, and I'll start with Councilmember Dewar. And again, remember, friends on the phone who might be listening, we are constrained a little bit by time constraints today, and so we'll be holding tightly to the questioning period. Councilmember Dewar, you have the floor.
Yeah, I only have a very brief question. I didn't understand what you just said, Mr. Reese, about a pass-through. I didn't get.
I think Mr. Flansburgh can explain it better than I can.
What did that mean?
Yeah, so there was a decision made, and we had attached that to this agenda item a long time ago for when South Truckee Meadows started to develop. And so the decision was that the City of Reno residents and businesses would pay the Reno fee, and then Reno would pay Washoe County their fee and pass those dollars through, if you will. The difference was at the time, Washoe County had a higher fee than we did. And so there was actually a subsidy going on for a period of time. And when it was, 100, 500 folks, it wasn't as big of an item as it's gotten up to 16,000. Now today, our fee is slightly higher than Washoe County's fee. But the difference is, so we actually would retain a little bit, but we don't retain enough to get the difference in the component, which we've come up and that'll be discussed in the next presentation. But there's a $3.50 amount per month that is contributable to what we do for stormwater in the bill. And I think the difference in our bills right now is $1 and change, if you will. But the difference is, and what I'm really talking about here, Councilmember Doer, is that we have all these customers on our books that we're collecting fee from, but then we're paying and having to transfer those funds every quarter to Washoe County for their residents. And likewise, Washoe County has a certain number of customers that go to our Truckee Meadows plant that they are collecting the fee from, and then they're having to pass that through to the city of Reno. And
Okay, so
really
I don't even know how you guys are keeping this straight, but I know you have a good accounting system, but maybe this reminds me of another system that I worked with South Meadows. And it was where one group was paying for expenses on another group's property and vice versa. And what I ended up having them do was trade property. So they were each paying for their own stuff. I don't even know if that's possible, but I'll wait to hear. But I might have to have this mapped out in some way to better understand it. Thank you.
Councilmember Breckus. Oh, Mr. Flansburgh, did I cut you off? I apologize.
I was just going to mention to Councilmember Doer, that's exactly what we're talking about here. We're talking about exchanging those customers and the conveyance piping, so that utility that has that in their that drains to their plant would then have that responsibility, just like we did for the Stonegate development. Stonegate is in the city of Reno, but it's going to flow to the Cold Springs plant. And so in that agreement that we have between Washoe County and ourselves, we agreed that those customers in the residents and businesses in Stonegate would flow to Cold Springs and Washoe County system from piping all the way to the plant.
Mr. Flansburgh,
Okay, we missed that last bit, but I get the concept.
Yeah, your connection is not great, so I don't know if that's moving or just be careful, because we want to make sure we hear you fully. Councilmember Breckus, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to start by asking Mr. Flansburgh, because I do have questions on these last 15 slides. I think each one in and of itself, there was maybe one or two that didn't have a lot of follow-up inquiry in my mind. But how much more time you have? What other items do you have to present? Because it's not necessarily following the packet. What else do you have to present today to us? How much time?
So the next item, stormwater utility, I think we can cover in about 10, 15 minutes or so, maybe 20. And then the meat of the meeting is really going to be Far West presenting the rates, the user rates and connection rates with council and going over a bunch of alternatives. So
well,
I would think if we could wrap this up in about 7 minutes or so, that would be good.
Well, you know what? I'm not entirely sure, because here's some things I need to explain to you that my understanding is I think the council needs to really understand the complex sewer arrangements in this region, and I'm not hearing a lot of understanding on that, and I'm not hearing a lot of explanation of how we got here. And it's been an area I've focused on for a lot of years, and I have comparisons to other regions where you don't have this complex arrangement. I mean, you just made the statement how in Stumworth we had 600 people, now we have 16,000. That's pretty consequential. And so, and also I want to call attention, the agreement that you added that was appended to the packet, it was not, to my understanding, please check me, but it wasn't the right agreement that you just referenced. It was the agreement that conveyed the Washoe County collection system, which was basically nothing when we did the island annexations in 1999. It was not the agreement for Stumworth. I didn't see that in the packet.
Yeah, so the exhibits in the back, I think, reference that, but I will verify that.
Okay, so here's what I think we need to kind of lay the groundwork is you rarely see counties operating sewer systems. It's usually municipalities that operate sewer systems, and it's sometimes to manage growth. It's the line. If you're going to go on sewer, you're going to come in the city. This region has a very unusual situation where the county at some point decided to be the master sewer people. And they didn't take Tumworth, but they did Stumworth, they did Lemon Valley, they did Cold Springs. And you got a lot of ex-urban development on that. And at some point in time, and, you know, Mr. Goodrich, whose comments I mentioned is, you know, at the time they were building plants out in Stumworth and Lemon Valley, they were leaving all these people up in West Reno on septic. And then the city finally annexed them, promised them sewer, you know, this way and that, and never came through, and is spending all this money to expand sewer without taking care of these folks. That's a big issue, and it's outside of Ward 1 too. It's in few other pieces. But the point is that the county, that arrangement with the county about how we pass through all that Stumworth money is so critical, because a lot of the money that you have to play with, to bond with, is not coming out of those 16,000 customers. And that's why I've been asking for so long for this fine-grained analysis of geography of sewer fees, connection fees to the expenditures. And it's just, you know, it's gotten so out of balance. But if you could go to slide 1, I have a question about that one, first of all.
Right?
Okay. So slide 1, or the first table, sorry, the first table. I mean the first pie chart, right there. Okay, the 10% debt service, what debt is that paying for?
So that will pay for, again, this is kind of an accounting thing. The funding that is paid for all of our debt comes out of this account. So that's why you'll see on the left-hand side in revenues, you'll see the other financing sources. That's money that's coming in from the connection fee side to pay for their pro rata share of that overall debt on the expense side. And so you'll also see on the expense side of the connection fee a debt service number. Those numbers are just directly going in here. It's strictly how we do the accounting, as it's been explained to me by our finance accounting manager.
Well, the question really is, since I came on in 2012, Reno's been all pay-go on the sewer fund. The only debt was that Verdi Lawton interceptor. That, my understanding, was about $18 million. So
we also have the debt. We also have debt or bonds on the Tumworth expansion that was completed in the 06, 07, 08, 09 timeframe.
I did not know that we went to debt on those. I did not know that. But okay, so we have those two. Does that 10% include the debt on the Reno Stead, the Risworth, the $65 million bond?
That'll come in next year, because as we take money, as we need money for expenses, we will be borrowing that money as needed. And so as we bring in on that debt, then we'll have payments that are due. But this is, I do not believe we have any money in this particular item for debt service payments that came from the Reno Stead expansion.
The first debt, my understanding, that $65 million bond, which I think is just the first step towards, you know, solving that expansion, because we still don't know how we're going to do the effluent. But that should be done in 2 years. How much, just projection, is that debt service to increase when we add that $65 million on in the next two years? Is it going to go up to 20%? What is it anticipated to go up to?
No, it won't be that large. If you recall, we have a 1.42% on that $55 million bond through State Revolving Loan Fund. I do not recall. I want to say it was around $2 million.
Okay.
But I do not recall what the annual debt service component would be.
Well, if we're paying $7 million a year on debt and we're adding $2 million, you know, it's a big hit, okay? And I don't know what the term is, 35 years or so on. Can we go to slide 2? I have a question on that. The next slide.
The next slide.
Mm-hmm. Now, debt service, the connection fees that came in are $14 million this year. Now, on the expenses, you're showing $4.4 million. I know that we're in about $1 million on contracts with Stantec to do whatever they've been doing, and we got Far West. are those in on the expenses, or are those in, how are you booking those?
So those, that may also be a portion of funding that comes out of this fee, because we look, when we do those projects, the percentage that would be related to operating, to maintenance, those types of things versus what is going to be for actual capacity projects. So those would also be included in part of that pass-through for accounting. We pay the expenses primarily through the user fee fund, but we move money from connection fee over to cover that pro rata share of those expenses.
Well, what I would really like to know and understand is this 4.4 in expenses that you paid out of the connection fee, does that include all the contract management, the consulting fees on the design, which are probably at this point, maybe $3 or $4 million, the contracts that have been let out? So is
Yes.
it just the hard construction contracts, or is it all the consulting and project management also being paid out of the connection fee? Because
The latter.
my colleagues
The
on
latter.
huh?
The latter,
Okay.
the construction and the design and the construction management.
Are being paid out of this consulting fee, this capital outlay part?
Out of the connection fee fund as they relate to a capacity expansion, yes.
Okay, I'd love to see this 4.4 broken down. Can we go to the next one?
Councilmember Breckus, you're now at 8 minutes, and so I've been
Okay,
trying to give you
I'll
enough
speed it up.
opportunity.
I'm sorry. I didn't ask questions during the presentation because I thought that was.
I understand.
Okay.
Councilmember Breckus, please be respectful to your
Okay.
colleagues. We
Okay.
all have questions, and we would all like to participate fully. That's
Okay,
all I'm
can we go to
asking.
the next one, please?
Okay.
Now, the question on the cash flow here as it goes forward is, does that take into account any requirements we have for cash on hand for debt coverage? Do we have any debt coverage requirements for for the revolving loan fund or any of those?
Yeah. We have our own policies, and so we maintain our cash flow based on our own policies, which also mirror and meet the cash on hand that we have through any of our debt service.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's
we do 60 days as a minimum, 60 days operating.
you know, that cash on hand sinking that much makes me kind of anxious. And I'd really like to hear from the finance department on what a sewer fund should have cash on hand. That's a dramatic drop. And I'll just let the colleagues know, when I came on to council, we were so low cash on hand when we had that emergency out at Tumworth that, I mean, we did have rates coming in, but it concerns me. And then I also want to understand, is the dewatering project that you've put on, the hay cutting, is that how is that being booked? Is that out of user funds, or is that related to expansion? Because it is allowing the expansion of the effluent to come in. So how are you booking that?
That was strictly based off existing conditions, so it was booked against the user fee.
So the user fees, because the dewatering project, in my mind, was so we can continue to do will serve letters out to Stead. We, laid some pipe. I don't know. I think I saw preliminary cost that this was maybe a $2 million project, and then, I don't know, maybe we get money for the hay. But to me, that should be a capacity project, because it allowed the Stead plant to continue to grow. And I guess my biggest concern is that, the way, going back to the first part, is how do I tell Ward 1 residents who are paying for all of this Stead work, like the dewatering plant, and having the October rates hitting, when people down in Damani Ranch aren't paying a cent for any of that?
Yeah, so I just want to be clear. Every time we bring an item to council, we do describe in there we talk about sewer fund, but we also break those out often to show if there's a split between connection fee and user fee on those items. And as far as your question, council member, you bring up one of the things that we think is important to know is how do we reconcile those items where we don't really collect a fee. We collect the fee and name, but we don't actually have those fees to work with, like in Damani Ranch or in South Truckee Meadows. And then as far as the reconcile the, spending money on the work up in North Valleys, how do you reconcile folks in North Valleys paying for flood damage that occurs on the irrigation?
Well,
The fee is really to help operate and manage the entire system that we have. And we do also include the stormwater in there currently.
But I think what you do is you do it through very transparent information on where the fees are being collected and where they're being expended. For example, that $14 million that came in on connection fees, can you tell me how much came out of the Tumworth sewer shed and how much came out of the Stead sewer shed, what that percentage was this last year?
I do not have it broken out by, again, they pay through their building fees. It's a one-time fee that comes in, and the fee is the same. So it's not easy to break out and say which one it came from. Certainly, if we had some sort of, it's even projects that are built in North Valleys, for instance, some of the Panatani development along North Virginia Street is sewering to Tumworth.
Yeah, and I just, my position to the council all along has been, let's blend out, let's dissect, if best term, the Stead sewer shed and Tumworth. Okay, we know Tumworth is this weird creature with the county that's getting subsidized, but let's at least do Stead and Tumworth. Then Tumworth can pay for the $18 million on Verdi Lawton, but let's understand how much Stead can afford for what they're doing.
Okay, do any of my colleagues have any additional questions on this item at this time? And I apologize, I have to toggle between different panels. Hearing none, I'm going to ask Councilmember Jardin if you can give us a motion, please. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties on the IT side.
What's the motion on the agenda? What's the motion?
Staff is seeking direction on whether we should look with Washoe County, work with our peers at Washoe County to look at potential to exchange and transfer customers and facilities with each other based on the treatment plant that serves those customers.
So I think that we don't have enough information to make that decision right now. I also don't believe that I really don't believe that. I think we also need to throw into those not existing, but also expanded. And I'll tell you another thing is I don't have any customers going to Tumworth, but I would not sell I don't have any constituents going to Tumworth, but I would not put my constituents at the mercy of the Washoe County Commission and their sewer rate setting without having any input to the city of Reno. That's wrong.
And if I may just add, this could be just direction to staff on information that you would like us to bring back for further discussion in regard to this item. But is there any desire to look at the potential to exchange customers and or sewer facility systems with Washoe County and city of Reno? And if there is not, that's good direction too.
Councilmember Delgado, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. I like the approach that Mr. Flansburgh has made on the second motion if we needed more information, but I'm also really confident in his review to move forward. But I can't see diving more into detail than what he's provided us already in terms of moving forward.
Councilmember Dewar.
Yeah, I really like the concept of marrying up, facilities with those who are using for them and paying for them. So to the extent that we can do that, I would love to understand the cost in terms of there's embedded costs that, for example, when we consolidated Tumwa with South Truckee Meadows Water Authority or GID, we had to do a lot of trading of debt And we had to understand who had paid for what and who had made what investment, and therefore who owed who what money. And I would expect the same level of analysis, if you will.
I
I'm
think
not
we'll
sure.
get that in the next round.
Agreed.
Right, right.
yeah.
I mean, it's just fair to customers. If they've already paid into one, why would they have to pay into another? You know, if they've taken on debt, if they've already paid the debt. So, I mean, anyway, I think the concept is very good.
Well, let's tickle this down a little bit further.
Hold on, Councilmember Breckus, we don't have a motion on the floor. And at this point in time, you have spoken more than anybody else on the call, and I'm keeping track of it so that everyone understands it's fair. Let's go back to Councilmember Delgado, who I believe has expressed a motion. And I apologize, we've lost a member.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Delgado, the floor is yours.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Vice Mayor. I believe what I'm hearing is for the second motion that Mr. Flansburgh has laid out for us to provide a little bit more information as to whether we want to go forward with the county commissioner or the county residents and ours and marrying that to, and I'd like to move forward with that motion.
Okay, I'll second it for the purpose of discussion. Any other additional comments at this time? Councilmember Breckus.
I really don't think that it's been clearly explained to the council what you do when you do this customer trade. If you look at what came in on the packet, it was the customer trade that came in when we annexed. And that customer trade gave us that Island 18 that was red that had no sewer capacity. So now we've got to figure out a way to take on that liability and get sewer up there. Similarly, if we're trading customers and say we take Lemon Valley customers, you know, the ones up there, are we responsible for their defective old collection systems that were probably substandard anyway because they came under county regulations, and then they get the collection system that was built to good city standards and is newer down in Demonte Ranch? That's a trade they'll take all day long. And so this is a huge mistake to go forward in this way without having that level of detail, because the collection systems are always one to know that what's going on. Not only that is, I don't know, does everyone know that that the county just issued maybe $40 million in bonds for Stumworth growth down in the Sierra Reflections, Washoe Valley area? So you're just sticking Stumworth ratepayers with a whole new set of bond debt.
Okay, any additional comments at this time? Councilmember Dewar.
I like the concept of this, as I already said, but I really do need to understand. I mean, it took quite some time. I see John nodding. It took quite some time to make sure that we're doing our due diligence for our constituents and ensuring that they're, as Councilman Breckus just said, not taking on debt that was just issued for someone else. You know, that this is fair. And I'm just wondering if the motion maker and seconder would consider a slightly modified motion that would talk about moving forward, taking the next steps, of bringing us the information. And again, this is as complicated in my mind as the merger with South Truckee Meadows GIDs and Hamwa. And the analysis, after we made our conceptual decision, the analysis took a couple of years to work through all the money pieces. And so I don't know that this has to take a couple of years, but it does need more work. So is there a way we could modify the motion to just, I can't just say yes today without understanding a little bit more. I mean,
I think the motion, if I read the staff report right, it says the staff recommends council accept the presentation and provide direction to staff regarding pursuance of possible exchange and transfer of certain City of Reno and Washoe County sanitary sewer customers and or certain sewer conveyance facilities based on which treatment plant those customers and facilities sewer to. That means we're going to go down the road of exploring that and getting all the information that one would need to make that decision, the financial wherewithal, the analysis of whose sewers are old or decrepit, who took debt when. I think
that would be fine. I didn't hear the motion that way. What I heard was move forward with this consolidation. So
yeah,
thank you for the clarification.
So here's
Totally no
Councilmember
problem.
Breckus, if I may. I do not support the motion. I would support the motion because once the ball gets rolling, and you can end up with another crappy agreement with Washoe County that puts us in the weak spot, just like the annexation one did, just like the current Stumworth one did. So if the council wants to entertain this, here's what I would do. I would have a map up, and I would understand what we're trading with what to the neighborhood level, because this is very neighborhood specific, and each of you who are involved in handing off this area can understand what you're giving up, what sort of neighborhoods you're giving up, and what sort of condition those neighborhoods are, age of growth, and so on. And likewise, we can see what we're taking in. And that's one. Number two is we need to understand the role of the collection system, the plant expansion, and the stormwater, and bifurcate each of those to understand what is tradable. That's number three. Number three, we should understand the growth demands of each of the plants that in their service area and what obligations are being made as we send our customers over to there. That's three, okay? So
Those are all
really
excellent points. I mean, I
No.
don't think that they're not anathema to what was proposed. Mr. Flansburgh, hold on, Ms. Breckus, 1 second, please. Mr. Flansburgh, you've heard the motion. You understand the direction that Councilmember Breckus has given. I make an assumption that the kinds of high-level, very important data-driven questions that Councilmember Breckus has asked, the mapping, all those things, are things that you are going to bring back to us. Is that accurate?
That is absolutely accurate. I mean, this gives me the ability to go say to Washoe County, hey, we're also interested in looking at these things together, and we're gonna spend a little bit of money doing it because we're gonna look at condition of facilities, and we're going to share that information and get those exhibits together so we can bring back the best information for you to make so thank you.
Well,
Mr.
perhaps you could put in the word
Ms.
explore.
Breckus, 1 second, please. Mr. Flansburgh, we're hearing a lot of lag and delay on your system, and I know that's not your fault, but this is one of the most critical things that we can do as a body because our charter limits the roles of our council to certain things, sewer, business licensing. And so Councilmember Breckus is right to be very cautious about all of these things and demand a lot of information because these are not, the one-time payments of, $10. These are millions and millions of dollars. Councilmember Breckus, I would appreciate if you would show me the same courtesy that I've showed to you this morning, because watching you shake your head, nod, act flabbergasted is just inappropriate.
Sorry,
So,
I have someone else in the room with me here.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Now, hold on, Councilmember Breckus. Mr. Flansburgh, I believe that you've heard the motion, you've heard the second, you've heard the concerns raised by Councilmember Dewar about the depth of information that we need, and also Councilmember Breckus. Can you as a staff, and you, John, I know are a man of incredible integrity, can you assure us that when we move forward on this vein, that the kinds of detailed information that are being requested will be provided as we move forward?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you for that. Any additional questions or comments okay, I'm going to do one more very brief round because we've got two other agenda items. Councilmember Dewar, I'll start with you, and Councilmember Breckus will conclude with you. Councilmember Dewar.
I just think the motion may be strengthened by putting in the word explore, the possibility, however it was phrased, so that's the intent, is to do a deep dive. I don't exactly know the words because we've had so much conversation, but as long as we have that concept in there that we're going to explore the possibility of this and look at all the numbers, I'm totally fine with it.
Okay, let me come to Councilmember Delgado, who was the motion maker. Councilmember Dewar has asked a very specific question. Mr. Delgado, can you amend your motion to include the concerns raised by the good woman from the ward, or from Councilmember Dewar?
Great addition to it. I'll add the amendment to my motion.
Okay, and I'll add my second to that. And now I'll come now to Councilmember Breckus.
So when the decision was made to bundle the Washoe County utilities in with Tumwa, it came out very unfavorable to Reno residents. That is on the recharge of the wells and a lot of the overdraws that came through that that system are being paid for by people who had no involvement in overdrawing those wells under the management of Washoe County Utilities for many years. And a lot of that was buried in, but Reno residents, urban residents who are on the Truckee River ended up paying and subsidizing that. That's my opinion. Now here, I think the Reno City Council, before we move off to another massive regional approach to solve problems, should have some bullet point principles that back up this discussion and conversation, because once it goes, it goes. And I think that we need to put a little time out and put some bullet points to protect our citizens on this. And I think this is a huge decision, and it would be a very foolish one to move forward and encumbering to our ratepayers who are already suffering quite a bit. Rates have gone up 35% since I've been on the Reno City Council. And I just don't think that this is a small decision that should just be handed off to the black box of conference calls between utility directors. So I'm not supportive.
Thank you, Councilmember Breckus. Councilmember Weber, you've got your hand raised.
I do. Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Mayor. I was not able to participate in the conversation, but I want to say that I absolutely believe that we need to move forward. We're depending on our qualified staff that has been doing a great job with all of these projects. And I just want to commend John Flansburgh for bringing this forward to us. And I think it is time for us to look at working with the other, with Washoe County and the city of Sparks on all of this. And it does need to be done regionally. And so I support the motion in the second.
Okay, I'm going to call for the question at this time, seeing no additional comments. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries 4-1.
Mr. Vice Mayor, with that, transitioning to item B2. This is discussion and potential direction to staff on proceeding to the next phase of implementation of a stormwater utility. This will also be presented by John Flansburgh.
Mr.
One moment
Flansburgh,
as
I know. Yeah, let me just also, while you're bringing up the thing, well, actually, I'm just going to let you make the presentation because I think it's pretty straightforward. So I'll wait to hear the presentation.
Mr. Vice Mayor, if I can please note for the record, just so council is aware of quorum, we have lost Councilmember Jardin at this time. So there are currently 5 of you on, just to be cognizant of quorum.
Okay.
Okay, we've got the shared screen, Mr. Flansburgh.
Great.
And so we're ready to go.
All right. This one really is pretty quick. Council has already given us a direction on a stormwater utility. Of course, that direction came November 2018. Councilmember Weber did hear the overall discussion. I do not believe Councilmember Reese, Vice Mayor Reese, you did not hear that discussion at the time. But at that point, we had a consultant that gave a presentation for feasibility. And if I could just kind of cut down to the chase of the discussion, when they did that feasibility study and talked about what would it cost to set up a stormwater utility, they were looking at somewhere between $8 and $9 per residential or average sized home. Currently, we charge, as I mentioned previously, about $3.50 a month of that sewer charge is due to stormwater. If we consolidate all of that together and had a separate stormwater charge, the net increase would be about $5 a month. And of course, our current level, as I mentioned in our capital, we're only doing about $2 million a year. And so when we have large flood projects for capital, it does take us many years to implement. Our ongoing yearly costs are in operations and maintenance and and our permit compliance operations items that we also have to perform. There was discussion at that meeting that we had about the Truckee River Flood Project. And again, just to note that the Truckee River Flood Project is not a regional drainage district. They are only on Truckee River flood items. You may recall that the Truckee River Flood Project is concentrating primarily downstream of Reno in the majority of their projects that have been approved. And it does not consider areas like North Valleys or irrigation ditches or other areas of concern within the Truckee Meadows. And so when we looked at the stormwater utility and did rate inputs, we were looking at a 20-year CIP of around 159 million. There were some flood management projects that were in downtown Reno that were not included in the project that would be going forward. And if they were going to be done at a later time. And then of course we'd have some administration and staffing that would need to take place for setting up a stormwater utility. And then we show here that obviously for a home, it's a certain cost, but for the large impervious areas, and imperviousness is the most defended way of setting up a stormwater utility to show what the equal contributions are. We did look at some locations, and obviously the slide here shows what that would actually look like in terms of the larger properties in their monthly cost. And then finally, looking at some of the stormwater utilities, Washoe County, it's not exactly a stormwater utility. It's a separate district that they have in Spanish Springs for some detention facilities they needed to build there. But Sparks has a utility set up, Carson City, and then here's a couple others with some costs just generally to show what those look like in other locations. And then finally, we would need to do some drainage master planning to inform us, get things to a higher level. Our phase one would include Autumn Hills, looking at that. We did analysis of Autumn Hills. We thought we had a solution. It works for the 50 to 70 year type storms, but anything over that, it might actually cause additional issues. And so we need to come up with a larger solution for that. And we have stations that also need to be part of overall master planning. And then just recommendations and next steps real quick. The implementation phase agreement is $865,500, and it would include developing the impervious data through GIS. We would have finalized the financial model. We'd be looking at potential credit systems for those who have built on-site detention retention facilities that lessens their overall impact. We would have all the communication and outreach, both with council and with the public. And then we would have need to integrate in with finance and their billing system and all the business impact rates. And all that work is included in the Raftellus consultant agreement. Additionally, outside of that, we would need staffing for stormwater utility in the future. We'd also be looking at that drainage master plan and needing to adopt the CIP, which wasn't part of Raftellus's scope. And so all that to just say, you gave us direction. That direction was a while back. Things have changed somewhat. However, we do not see that this issue is any less important. But we are seeking direction if we should continue towards implementation, and if so, we will bring that consultant agreement back to you on your August 26th meeting.
Okay, Councilmember Breckus.
Thank you. So a couple follow-up questions. First of all, this report was done in July of 2019, and I know I've been asking and asking for it to come forward when we've met. Why did it take a year to bring it forward? Did staff make any changes to it? I mean, because it was really a technical work. What took so long?
There were a few minor changes. Primarily, we were asked to hold on this item. There was a lot of other issues going on with sewer, North Valley specifically, effluent management, and so we were asked to hold off on this item, and now we're ready to bring it forward.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I think there were, interests who had priorities to get the expansion contracts underway. But I'd like to express to the council and those who are watching that the stand-up of this utility, in my mind, is one of the most equitable economic decisions we can make to our residents. Because if it can pull off of their sewer expenses and be a more equitable rate structure in terms of those who create the stormwater runoff, they pay more, then there can be relief on the sewer side, because right now they're getting hit on the sewer side, and the study went through that. So it's been a huge priority for me. If this council really stands with the values of equity, there's things that are within our control, and this is the one that is most in our control to move forward, and I've been really wanting it to come forward. Let me ask you, on the study, I was very intrigued by some of the data of the examples, but as we know from yesterday, when we accepted the grant for to pay down a little bit of the expense on the STED expansion, there was a statement in that grant application that we've got 15 million square feet of industrial coming in the North Valleys, which we all know, and each of those, for comparison, Meadowood Mall is about 1 million square feet, so we've got 1 million square feet of rooftop, 15 million of rooftop going in on the North Valleys, which would create a huge amount of runoff. Why didn't we see a cost analysis of a large industrial building in those samples? Because we have so many of those and it's such a growing sector. Why didn't they show that? Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, so the very top one line would be, that would be equal to, some of the large industrial. Again, we're talking impervious surface, roofs and pavement. But
I really don't think that's correct, because a Target shopping center may be 1 million square feet when you get rooftop and parking lot, but some of these buildings are 1 million square feet. And so then you put in, I think they're on like 12 to maybe 18 acres.
Yeah, so council member, of course, this cost scales up based on the size of impervious area.
Okay. And then my other question is, and I didn't pick this up when I saw the study, but you discount, say the big industrial building that's 1 million square feet on the edge of Swan Lake that got built, the Makata or whatever, I think it's got 2 buildings worth about 1.5 million square feet. And they did put a detention pond in. The detention pond is probably bigger than the block I'm sitting on right here. But why would you discount them? Are you going to discount my yard for the little Japanese kind of, strain thing that I have going through my front yard?
So of course, we're going to come up with some equitable charges for residential, and there may be broken out. I think they were showing how there might be large residential because you've got a large home with lots of driveway surface, and then you're going to have your smaller, more, single-family home that's similar sized. When the council, and we had this discussion previously, there was a request to look at, would there be some sort of consideration if you put something in place to do your own detention or retention on your facility. And so we're just saying that we've included that in the consultant agreement that we would bring back to analyze.
I could, and if I could just ask one more question, I can understand that. I just want to know, if I'm going to get $2 off a month or a winter because I got a rain barrel, fine, but I should have the same consideration as the industrial that did what they did. But the next question is, there's comment in this study about how the Truckee Meadows flood project vote of the people failed a couple years ago. We all know that. I think it was kind of a forced issue by the flood project at that point. But that maybe some of this money would go toward that. I have concern for that because we know the flood project gets an 8-cent sales tax anyway. And I guess, how would that be considered?
So we have projects included, and primarily the projects we have would be like replacement of Lake Street Bridge. The biggest component that we have is actually maintenance rehabilitation of some of the flood walls in downtown, as well as rebuilding some of the flood walls. I suspect that there could be an argument made for potentially going, reaching out to the flood project if we had a project going on for some sort of a match that wouldn't be unheard of, that has something that's been happened in the past, if it was something that was helping with flood resilience. So I think we could probably look at that, but you make a good point. I mean, a sales tax is being paid by the entire region. Is there a potential for some projects that we have that certainly would be potentially flood project eligible, and that would be another discussion for that body that works with the Truckee River Flood Management Authority.
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I've kind of thought that the flood project should just devolve that money to the jurisdictions to do projects on a CIP and then let us run with our projects married up with, what this funding source gets us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank
Councilmember
you.
Dewar.
Yeah, thank you. A couple slides ago before this one, Don, you covered some, well, maybe it wasn't before, but you covered some of the cost comparisons. That was the one I was looking for. There you go. I think that's it. I was a little confused because I was looking for, you combine the rate in Sparks for river and flood, which I wasn't really sure what that meant, because they're paying a stormwater fee and they have the two rates. One's for residential, which I think is still $5.31 or 42 cents, right? And then I wasn't sure, do they pay another fee?
Yes, there's a river flooding fee and a stormwater fee.
Okay, so what's the stormwater fee?
A stormwater fee would be it'd be the kind of like this. It all goes towards the maintenance and operations and management of stormwater. But for instance, they have the maintenance of their catch basins, and North Truckee Drain was a project, so a large capital project that was built. So that would be part of the overall flood fee that would have been gathered.
Right. So are these fees though for residential or for commercial?
This is residential. We wanted to just share peer utilities rate per month by residential, and they actually, I believe, clocked this on off the sewer bill as a separate line item on that.
What you showed us for us though was the commercial side, like you had schools and all that, but I didn't see a residential rate. Did I miss it?
So when we showed this slide, when they did the analysis, they looked at feasibility between $8 and $9. We'll call it $8.50 per month for an average size household. And currently people are paying $3.50 a month on their sewer bill. So if you reduce the sewer bill by $3.50 and put a new charge of $8.50 on the average size household, that net increase would be $5. So $8.50 would be the rate. So, sorry.
Okay, that's very helpful. Just it was on different pages, so it was hard to compare. I just want to say I'm probably as passionate as Councilman Breckus on moving forward with a stormwater utility. I think you know that. I mean, we both live where we have the ditches that caused tremendous flooding in 2017. I've got the Huffacre situation that you referenced throughout this presentation, which is we had some 40 homes. I want to say 40 of the 60 homes in Reno that got flooded in 2017 were over there. So I'm really glad to see us moving forward. And I was surprised to hear what you said today, that after further analysis of the Huffacre situation, the original plan maybe not get it done. So I'm sorry to hear that. But I know that we also talked about another plan which had to do with maybe crossing a field and using it as a catch basin, and it still can be used as a field. And that is a very, very common technology used around America, used in Southern Nevada, Las Vegas, etc. So is that what you're kind of thinking, or do we just not know?
We will need to bring that back because it's likely to be fairly involved. We've looked at, let's just put it this way, we've looked at all the easy solutions.
Okay. Okay. Well, I am very in favor of us moving forward. I think Councilman Breckus and I either made the motion in the second when we, several years ago to move forward with this. So I'm still a keen supporter.
Okay, is that a motion, Councilmember Dewar?
It would be.
Okay, I have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Well, I wouldn't mind a little more
Okay,
discussion.
No problem. I have a motion and a second, and now I'll open up for discussion. Councilmember Breckes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I think one really important consideration here is that we know the sewers are on annual escalators of CPI, and I think there's a running about 3%. And like I said on the previous item, sewer rates since I've been on in 2012 have gone up about 34, 35%. They're hefty. And so, there's going to be a little bit of back out, maybe, but it's going to be static on those dollars. And then presumably the sewer will continue on the CPI, and this may or may not go on the CPI. And so if you're putting $550 a year or a month, $550 a month on people, on residential, that's about $60 a year. That's a big jump. And I know it's going to be stormwater, but it's still going to be a sewer bill. And so that's going to be a big jump. It's going to come with a lot of heat to the council. And so what I really think that needs to happen is that we need to get very solid on the sewer side of the capital projects. I mean, and this is not a big mystery. When we sit over at Tumwa, they have the most defined capital programs. They can run into some of those big pie charts that Mr. Flansburgh showed us and show us all those projects and decide, the board can decide, we're going to pull this project out and move it 3 years because we're not going to raise the rates this May. We're going to move them next May. And we don't have that fine tuning. And I am very concerned without that fine tuning on the sewer side, it's going to make all this work come to not politically tenable for the council to add $60 a year to household budgets. So I think that with the sewer staying on the automatic escalator, which I don't think is best practice, I think we're setting ourselves up to fail. I support the motion, but I did not support the last motion because I think the council needs to re-examine the automatic escalator on the sewer. It's very easy for the council to not spend a lot of time looking at the capital projects on the sewer side, taking on debt, if they're on an automatic escalator. But if you're very diligent in having to make those rate hike votes every year, then you're going to be more fair to understand what you're hiking rates for each time. So I'm very concerned that we're going down this not in a way that's going to, at the end of the day, not materialize if we don't look closer at the sewer rate hikes that are on autopilot.
If I may have a moment just to have a little bit of discussion, if I may.
Mr. Flansburgh, the floor is yours.
It actually is a best practice to have a CPI rider. When we put these projects together, there's an exercise you can do to look at today's dollars, and then you move the project out into the future somewhere and you escalate it in that number and then bring it forward into a present day value. But there's also a practice where you get today's value and calculate everything on that basis. And then you put the inflation rider in there for CPI to capture that inflation that's occurring. And that's how we handle our rate making. So, I mean, you can do it on the back end or you can do it on the front end. We think it's more transparent to show it in this manner. And I would recommend that you do that for because we did the same thing when we talked about the connection fees coming forward. But I recommend that for all. And that's just my one comment there. Thank you.
Mr. Flansburgh, when are the rate discussions for either system to be available to us? I mean, Councilmember Breckes makes a good point, and of course, it's not just in these meetings that we're talking about sewer or exploring them. Of course, each member is available to have meetings with constituents, with staff, to tour facilities, which I've had the privilege of doing. I think it is inaccurate to say that somehow we're not looking at these things. We are, we just may see them not exactly the same. So I think it's important, both from an equity standpoint and from a debt management standpoint, to understand many of the same numbers that are being identified. I have a general sense in life that as we roll along into the future, everything costs more. I mean, I think the repair costs, the replacement costs, the construction costs, salaries and benefits, everything rises. So in some ways, there is a natural extension of what we know as human beings to be true that bears itself out. And so I want to be able to see those things in order that we make the best decisions for our end use customers. At the end of the day, our customers want to be able to flush their toilet and turn on their tap without thinking too much about where it came from or where it's going to. And they want to do so on a cost-effective manner. We, of course, as a body, want to deliver the service at a level that they can come to expect and to have certainty too, so that when somebody wakes up one day, they don't go to use one of those things and it doesn't work. I'm concerned about this island issue that Councilmember Breckus has flagged and the commenter made. I think there's got to be an effort made to fix whatever historical failings have happened. And through these processes, I hope that some of those things are addressed. Capacity is where it is. We've gone for an expansion up north. I think there are going to be discussions about regionalization, no matter how we put it. But at the end of the day, those pieces of the puzzle have to be provided to our community for their input and appreciation. They have to be provided for us as decision makers. And I trust that your office and also our finance folks will make it so that we see that transparently and understand what we're ultimately voting to approve. And Mr. Flansburgh,
Yes.
Before you respond, can I ask Madam Clerk, can you take us out of the sharing mode here? Because it's hard. I'm only seeing a little teeny John Flansburgh head. And there we go. Thank you for that. I just want to be able to see you so that we're having a conversation eye to eye, so to speak. We're not in person, of course, but does my inquiry make sense, Mr. Flansburgh, and can you provide some response?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do bring to council every year during budget our capital improvement program, and we talk about the rates that are going to be charged. So those are in there. It's just that the practice is in our ordinance, we have the CPI built in. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't at a budget hearing discussion say, maybe we aren't going to raise, maybe we do want to defer some capital program or something like that. And we would be happy to have that conversation, but we bring back each year to the council what the projects we have based within the budget that we'll have allowed, and we do look at that consumer price index rider. So thank you for that, but you see it every year.
It's not so much that we didn't see it, it's that it needs to be broken out in a way that is meaningful to the public. It's one thing to have it on page 875 of a 1300-point PowerPoint presentation. It's another to be able to see it, how it really affects human beings. I think part of the problem too is that there have been periods of prolonged deferred maintenance. There have been periods of prolonged inactivity. And so what happens is if you've got 20 or 25 years where you've kicked the can down the road and you eventually get to the point where you're now kind of in crisis mode because you're looking at expansions that should have happened before, you're looking at regionalization opportunities that could have happened earlier, it looks like a bigger thing than it really is had it been planned for and looked at over a period of many years. And that is where I kind of perhaps diverge from the good council member from Ward 1, in as much as there have been limited decisions made in a historical past. And now we come to a moment where we have to make larger decisions. And yes, those have consequences. And you saw deep valleys and cuts at times to the budget. But I don't think it's fair to say that our council should be tagged with that, given that it's been a historical thing that's happened over a period of time. I also don't want to leave future councils having to make even more dramatic changes because we continue to kick the can down the curb. I am a person who believes that we should have a measured and reasonable approach over a prolonged period of time, because that vision allows us to flatten out the cost to people so that there aren't shocks to the system. And so it can be jarring, but I also know that what we've done in the past cannot be what we continue to be doing in the future. Thank you, Mr. Flansburgh, for your comment. We have a motion in a second. I'm going to call for the question at this time. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously.
Mr.
Go
Vice,
get him, John.
All right.
Good job.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Okay, so,
Yes,
That's all
Madam
right.
Clerk.
John, you just keep on keeping on. We've got another presentation from Mr. Flansburgh, and this one will include some friends.
all right. So I just want to introduce our consultant, Far West Engineering. Lucas Tipton will be making a presentation to you in regards to the rate, user fee and connection fee rate study. And just wanted to introduce him and appreciate the good work that Far West has performed. They have been performing rate analyses for Washoe County and for Sparks. So it's nice to have someone that's local that can do this work and that we're very comfortable with. So with that being said, Madam Clerk, if you would go ahead and allow Lucas Tipton and others to join the meeting, then we can begin that presentation.
Could I just ask a question as set up to this?
Yeah.
Did
Councilmember Brightman.
council approve this contract for this rate study?
Yes.
Okay, and would you refresh my mind why we did this again? If we have the CPI on, why are we looking at rates again?
Oh, great question. So general best practice is always to review your rates for user fee sufficiency to make sure that you have enough, that the user fee is going to be sufficient for the program, the projects that you have out there for your maintenance and operations. And Lucas will cover all of that as part of the presentation to you.
Okay, Mr. Tipton and Mr. Korotkin, I think, and Mr. Hester are the ones that I see in our lobby, and they're being transitioned over to be able to speak. Can I ask, just so I can get my bearings, these are, how long are the presentations intended to be?
So we do have about a half-hour presentation from Far West. That is the meat of this meeting, and then a very short one from both John Hester and Joel for the proposal. Just a very brief introduction of the proposal.
Okay, and just a reminder, folks, that we have potentially quorum issues that will affect our meeting starting at 1 o'clock. And so we've got to keep to the task, and if that can be abbreviated, that'd be great. Councilmember Dewar?
Yeah, could you just introduce each of these speakers? Who do they represent? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Flansburgh, go ahead and make all those introductions, and let's get rolling.
Very good. So today we'll hear from Lucas Tipton, principal engineer with Far West Engineering on the rate study. We're also going to hear from John Hester and Joe Korotkin. John Hester is representing the LDC Advisors private equity firm, and Joel Korotkin is representing the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. They have a joint proposal, so we have a brief presentation to council to introduce you to that proposal.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll turn time over to Lucas.
Lucas, at this time, we have transitioned over and unmuted you, and you may share your screen. Lucas, it looks like on our end, we don't see that you have video capabilities, so it could be the version of Zoom that you're running.
Ms. Turney, where are we?
We are waiting to see if Lucas can be able to switch over, but from what we're seeing on a technical standpoint, it appears that he may not have a webcam or a microphone on his desktop. So I would defer to Mr. Flansburgh to identify if there's a secondary person who can present on behalf of Lucas. And then Lucas
so
can
we
try
ran-
to call in.
I was gonna say, maybe he could call in.
Can
Yeah, we ran
someone
through a
email a thing and then share it from Mr. Flansburgh's computer? Bottom line is we don't have time to spend 15 minutes getting the technical stuff up to speed. If we have to, we'll bring this back at another time. Okay, there's something moving.
John, we have the presentation that Carrie Lanza sent over, and then we have the colonies presentation as well. I don't know if you feel it would be,
Fabulous.
okay, we'll go ahead and pull up your presentation. Is that the best way to proceed?
Hello?
Yes. There, Lucas
Yes.
is on now. I hear him.
Yeah,
So if
I don't
you
know,
could-
it went to connect and it's been working all morning and then it's saying I don't have a microphone or a webcam.
Mr. Tipton, we can hear you in the chambers now, and it
Great.
sounds like we have another way to put the material and presentation on our screen. So give us a chance to do that. Just would give you the pro tip that we're each in Zoom and we're working through technical difficulties, so it's no problem that those arise for all of us. Just do your best to speak as directly into whatever system you're using, because we have to record these for the public and for posterity, and we need to be able to hear as well. So I don't know if you can see it, but we now see something that's labeled as agenda and Far West Engineering's logo in the left screen there.
Right, bottom right. So, I mean, my whole Zoom window went away, so I don't know which screen I'm sharing. Do you
Well, I'm
see
not sure
my-
you're sharing anything. I thought that maybe someone else on our end was sharing.
All right,
Mr. Flansburgh, who is sharing the screen and who
if-
can advance it? Or is that-
Mr. Vice Mayor, if I can jump in, this is City Clerk here. Lucas et al., at this point, we have the presentation in chambers pulled up. We can advance your slides for you, and we are screen sharing on our end.
Okay.
If you will just indicate when to advance, we'll be happy to do that on your behalf.
Great, I will get right to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Sorry for that delay. Yeah, my name is Lucas Tipton with Far West Engineering, located right here in Reno. We performed a rate sufficiency and connection fee analysis, which we're presenting on today. This presentation's it's divided into two primary sections: user charges and connection fees. We're going to take a little break after user charges to kick back to John and the other group that he wants to present on today, and then we'll pick back up with connection fees. So if we could go next. Far West was retained in February and worked in collaboration with city staff to compare future revenues from sewer user fees against the future expenses for the wastewater utility. And those expenses do incorporate the city's 10-year capital improvement program, or CIP. The goal of our rate sufficiency analysis was to confirm that the existing rate structure and ordinance will be able to meet the city's needs over the 10-year study period. This level of effort was a perfect match with the financial health of the wastewater utility and is an indication that user rates are currently being assessed properly. I'd like to point out that the critical variable for determining the suitability of the rates was the city's 10-year CIP. And for that reason, our analysis considered 10 different CIP alternatives, which were then narrowed down to 3 for the final report. The current rate structure as it sits today was developed as part of a study completed in 2005 by Red Oak Consulting. As part of our work, Far West confirmed that many of the findings and recommendations of that study are still valid for the next 10 years. 2 other sufficiency analyses have been, similar to this, have been completed since 2005, which also found that the rates were appropriate and that the CPI adjustments provided sufficient increases in revenues each year. Finally, for anyone who's not familiar with the Consumer Price Index, it's published monthly by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and represents the average change in the price of goods, both regionally and nationally. The CPI is commonly used to measure inflation, and in general, CPI adjustments are in line with other federal and state cost of living adjustments. We could go next. So on to the first portion of our presentation. Let's look into user charges in a bit more detail. Next. There we go. The city assesses user charges according to Reno Municipal Code 12-1610 with the primary duty to recover the costs associated with running a wastewater utility. In the city's case, these costs are primarily associated with staffing, with maintenance activities and electrical service for the collection system, and the operational costs of the two water reclamation facilities, Riswharf and Tumwharf. The latter of which is operated in conjunction with the city of Sparks. One item I'd like to point out is that the current structure of the wastewater fund, as we discussed previously, does use portions of sewer user revenues for stormwater related costs or expenses. Next, please. Looking back at the 15-year history of user fees, you can see that the rates have been increased at different rates depending on the period in time. However, since 2015, the sewer user fee has been adjusted according to the CPI on an annual basis. Next. The basis or structure for the sewer use charges was developed by Red Oak in their study in 2005, but those methods are still in line with current industry standard practices. More specifically, sewer use charges were developed using a basis commonly referred to as the cash basis, which has the primary duty to recover costs as opposed to building reserves or earning any specific return on an investment. Next, please. For our analysis, city staff provided a 20-year CIP, which identified infrastructure replacement and capacity expansion projects, which will need to be completed prior to 2040. For our user rate sufficiency analysis, we only considered a 10-year period or the first 10 years of that CIP. At the top of this table, you can see the distribution of the repair and replacement projects versus the expansion projects for that 10-year study period. And to be clear, repair and replacement projects are typically funded through user charges, while expansion projects are funded through connection fees to ensure that growth pays for growth. Our study initially looked at the impact to user rates according to the 10 different CIP alternatives before narrowing down to the 3 that we show you here. So what's the difference between these 3 alternatives? Alternative 1 is an alternative I deem as the current CIP, and it implements a pay-as-you-go approach, utilizing user fees, reserves, and connection fee revenues, with the exception of cash contributions from Sparks for their share of Tumwharf improvements, and the $55 million bond for the Riswharf expansion. Alternative 2 is what I call the Riswharf effluent bonding alternative. This takes the current CIP, it applies a delay to some of the projects associated with the Lawton Verdi interceptor, and it includes an additional $90 million bond to finance effluent management projects at Riswharf. Another key difference from alternative 1 is the formation of the separate stormwater utility, which was previously discussed. By creating that separate stormwater utility, it removes some stormwater projects from the CIP and slightly reduces future revenues by that 350 amount that we discussed previously. Finally, alternative 3, or the public-private partnership alternative, It's very similar to alternative 2 in that it assumes the formation of the stormwater utility, but it eliminates the RISWRF effluent management projects proposed in Alt 2, and instead utilizes a public-private partnership to send effluent to the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. John and group are going to discuss this in a little more detail following this first discussion on user charges. Key takeaways from this table are that repair and replacement projects outpace expansion projects by an approximate ratio of 1.75 to 1. Alternative 1 requires the greatest amount of funding from user rates at more than 500 million. Alternative 2 requires the largest amount of future debt to be taken on. And alternative 3 is contingent on that public-private partnership moving forward. And lastly on this slide is that alternative 1 was proved to be infeasible as highlighted on this following slide here. If we could switch.
Excuse me, before you go on, Councilwoman Dewar, can you go back to that? I'm struggling to know what alternative 1, 2, and 3 are. Did you have the previous slide where you showed us what's in each package? I mean, you verbally said it, but what I'm saying is what's in that alternative? Is it just different funding mechanisms? Do they all pay for the same thing? Or you said they drop out this and have that? And hopefully later you could address that.
So city staff maintains a 20-year capital improvement program.
Right.
And that's what is in Alt 1, just as presented to us. We put in those projects at their values on the scheduled years for implementation. And then we took that one didn't work. So
what do you mean it didn't work?
Well, I'll show you. It drove the sewer fund into a negative balance condition.
Okay.
For 5 of the 10 years. And so then we created alternatives. Alternative 2 took that same CIP and it delayed a few projects. So we pushed them back on years where maybe we hit a negative with alternative 1. We moved that project 2 years beyond.
Okay.
And then we also took in some outside funding or $90 million in bonding for the Reno Stead effluent projects. And
alternative 3 uses this public-private partnership with the Indian Colony.
Correct. Very similar to alternative 2, but instead of that bonding for the effluent projects, we go with the public-private partnership.
Okay, but it assumes though that we have approved the 10-year capital improvement program and we're going to do all of it. And it's just for sewer, right? I mean.
Yes.
Okay.
May I ask a question also?
Yes. Councilwoman
Okay,
Decker.
so alternate 1 is presumably, and I will say that budget this year was very chaotic and the CIP was hardly, in focus. And there's been years where projects on the sewer fund pop up when they're not even on the CIP. They just come in and we don't go through what many jurisdictions do, which is an amendment to the CIP. So I'm a little hazy on what's on alternate 1, but I presume it has the $65 million in the bond that we did. But how does alternate 1 reflect our 10-year CIP when we really don't know what we're going to do with the effluent when we expand RISWRF up to the 4 MGD? What's the assumption for all of the RISWRF expansion? What's dollar numbers? What's that expansion?
Yeah, those numbers came from the recently completed Lemon Valley Stead wastewater facility plan, where we looked at a variety of effluent projects up there. And I think there's about $100 million in effluent projects associated with Reno Stead, but it hasn't been approved yet. Yeah.
Only 100 million. I don't recall that study. Maybe it came to us in a different name. So it's only $100 million in effluent. Mr. Blandsberg told us that we were probably looking at a $90 million reservoir, and then that doesn't even get to the ASR. So does that $100 million in effluent management carry through each of these alternatives?
Well, it would in alternatives 1 and 2, and 100 million might have been that first phase. I don't want to misspeak here, but alternatives 1 and 2 included that 100 million, let's say, for the reservoir, or for similar projects. Alternative 3 did not. Alternative 3 cut that out and goes with the public-private partnership.
The public, and in that public-private partnership, does it program out debt payments and all that? Because, you know, if you're bringing in private equity, it's just a financing mechanism. It's not, you know, right?
Yeah, well, you can see with that bottom line there that the other funding sources is the same for alternative 1 and alternative 3. So right now our alternative 3 doesn't look to take on additional debt. But John would be better to speak on where we're at with the public-private partnership option and what those debt impacts would be.
Okay, but I guess my question is, the $100 million in the phase 1, does that get us operational on 4 MGD up at Stead?
Yes.
Fully operational and meeting effluent and everything. Okay. And then is the TMWRF number, because we've been waiting and waiting. I think the TMWRF master plan was getting done. It keeps getting delayed and pushed off, and it hasn't come to the council or the joint committee. But what is the constant number on is the number for TMWRF constant all throughout?
Yes. The TMWRF number is the same for all alternatives. What is that number? I think we have that here a little bit later.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, could we go to the bar graph now? Here, yes. So here, what we're looking at on this graphic is the end of year balance of the wastewater operating fund. As you can see in yellow, that's alternative 1, which forces the operating fund to work in that deficit condition for 5 of the 10 years of the study period. And for this reason, that's why this alternative was discarded and not determined to not be a viable option. Our analysis found that alternative 2, or the reservoir effluent bonding alternative, shown in blue, to be the preferred CIP alternative. And we're going to use alternative 2 results for many of the future user charges and connection fees you're going to see in this presentation, unless otherwise noted. With some of the connection fee, we do specifically call out alternative 3, what the fees would be under alternative 3. And lastly, both the reservoir effluent bonding alternative, shown in blue, and the public-private partnership alternative, shown in green, those are both viable alternatives for the city to pursue per this analysis. To better understand how annual revenues compare to the projected expenses under alternative 2, we're going to look at the revenue requirement, which is shown here on the next slide. Perfect. What this graphic is displaying is that the revenues under the existing rate structure and ordinance are sufficient to operate the wastewater utility over the study period, as shown with the black line. Comparing this revenue trend line to annual expenses shown with the individual bars, you can see that in some years the utility operates in a deficit and some years in a surplus, which is very common for a large municipal utility. Additionally, not once during the study period does the utility go into a negative balance condition, and current reserve balances are not significantly impacted, positively or negatively, at the end of the study period. Looking at these green and red bars, it's also clear that the 2 largest expenses which sewer user charges need to meet are your annual operating expenses and your capital outlay, which are the costs of those repair and replacement projects discussed earlier. Finally, you can see that the city will be greatly reducing its annual debt service between 2025 and 2030, with the largest liability being the $55 million reservoir bond as part of alternative 2. The $90 million reservoir effluent bond that's being proposed in Alt 2 it's expected to hit the books in 2030, which will result in annual debt going back to its historical averages starting in 2031.
Wait a second. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Why was the presumption, if we're doing an expansion now of 2 MGD, which is supposed to take place in 2 years, why are we pushing the payment on that debt structure off for 8 years? Why was that presumption made? I mean, that's just like, that's really expensive money to have it sitting there 8 years.
No, I mean, I guess I'm not following with the effluent bond.
Well, the effluent bond, which gets us rid of the effluent in totality to be able to be operational at 4 MGD. Why is that debt? When would we issue that bond under this assumption?
It wouldn't sit around for 8 years, I guess. You wouldn't issue that bond now and not start paying for it till 2030. I think there was some temporary operational projects that you could implement that could get you through until that time.
Oh,
If
the hay.
If I could, if you look at the bar graph, you'll see the gray is the new debt service. There would be some new debt service for like aquifer storage and recovery that would occur earlier on. The reason that the debt service would go out past 2030 is because we wouldn't look at doing the reservoir, that large project, until FY 28, 29, 30. So it'd be towards the latter end of this. So that debt service would kick in 2031, just for clarification.
Great. Since no changes to the existing rate structure are being proposed at this time as part of this analysis, if we can go to the next one. Perfect. This also means that there's going to be no changes to the current customer classes at this time as well. So these customer classes will remain moving forward. And then on to our last slide here. In conclusion, so this is the existing rate structure was found to be sufficient to meet the wastewater utilities needs. And this table displays what the rates will be adjusted to come October 1st. The one section of our work which is proposing changes is with connection fees. So before we move on to that or to the discussion on the public-private partnership, are there any additional questions or comments that we want to address now with regards to user fees?
Yes.
Councilmember Breckus.
I thought that the council gave direction to start to move the user fees into tying differential size for on the residential side. Is that true? Or was that just on the connection fee that we gave direction on previously?
My understanding is just connection fees. We do that analysis on connection fees.
Okay, just so my understanding's clear is on the residential, it's flat. On the commercial, it's tied to water use, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess I'm just really still questioning, and I think that table on the alternate 1, 2, and 3, and then the bar graph on the debt and the different, components really would need to marry up to a side table that shows the differences between the capital projects. I'm very confused about, we issued $65 million in debt to do the expansion, and that's underway. And I know, Mr. Flansburgh, you said 55, but you got $6 million in contracts out there for professional services, so I think it's kind of a fair number. So 65, that'll be operational 2 years to 4 MGD, but we're not going to bring on an effluent project for 7 years after that. Where are we going to put the effluent in that period of time?
So just to be clear, Councilmember Breckus, we do have the aquifer storage and recovery project within the near term. So the next 2 to 3 years with that project. So that is the initial project that would go to take care of our effluent management to meet our needs for the expansion. Going from 4 to 6 is when we would look at needing to have the reservoir in place, and so that's the later years. So just want to be clear so that we can pinpoint that. Thank
But
you.
you know what? That is a changed situation from what you told us before, because before you told us the reservoir was the intermediate and ASR was the long-term. I remember that very precisely in that PowerPoint. And now it sounds like it's flipped, that ASR is coming on sooner and then this reservoir would be later. But my question is, 2 years on the ASR? I sit on Tumwa and they tell me it's 6 or 7 years.
Mr. Flansburgh, I didn't understand that to be a change in direction, though. I understood that to have been part of the original presentation. Now, the timing of it may be, I apologize, the timing of it may be different, but is that a change in the original direction?
Yeah, early conversations that we had with effluent management, we talked about rebuilding the reservoir first. But the most recent conversations we've been consistent with the aquifer storage and recovery before the reservoir.
Okay, that was what I was trying to point out. And so I understood Councilmember Breckis's comment and why it was contextually relevant. I was just trying to understand. My understanding was the exact opposite. Councilmember Dewar, did you have your hand raised? I'm so, yeah.
I was going to say I had a, maybe there was a change and we just didn't know about it. You know, maybe you guys changed your concepts, but we just didn't get an intermediary presentation. Because I thought you were, I thought it was wide open. You were still talking about Long Valley Creek. I mean, not you, because we didn't give permission at Reno, but with Pamois. We were talking about the reservoir. We were talking about the ASR, and then we said it could be at Bedell Flat, and it could be at American Flat. And then we heard at Tumwa, I think, that Bedell Flat was out. So maybe we just have missed part of the conversation as you've transitioned.
Yeah, and just to be clear, also, when Councilmember Breckis brings up this 7-year or 8-year, whatever time frame, we know that we're going to have time to put water in, do the A+ treatment, put the water into the aquifer, pull it back out, and do testing. That's what's so great about the American Flat farm site, is we have a place directly to take the water, to use it beneficially, and to test it and prove up the potable water source, which might be out in that longer 7, 8, 9, 10-year time frame for proving up the potable. It doesn't mean that we don't have a place to take effluent and do effluent management. Thank you.
And is Bedell Flat completely out, or is it just not the quantities that you had hoped for?
We have determined through Tumwa that it's no longer feasible, so it's out.
Completely out. So either it connects directly to Swan Lake, or do you know what the issues are generally?
The issue primarily was geotechnical. We had a clay lens that wasn't going through, and that would cause disbursement of the water. So the sand location wasn't deep enough or didn't connect, couldn't be relied on to connect directly.
Okay, so it's off the table, Bedell Flat. And we're just at the ASR and the application for the alfalfa or whatever. We're doing both at American Flat, and you would either apply it on top or apply it down below, I guess, depending.
Yeah, so we would store it and down below. As we had water take during the summer that was available, we would do directly, but most likely we'll be pumping it from the aquifer below and applying it on top during the agricultural season.
Okay, and that water doesn't need extra treatment. I guess that can be straight out of the lake. And we proved up, can we use stormwater for ASR?
So
or is that still in the research phase?
In order to do direct injection, we would have to treat to A+ standards. So
okay.
We do have to do a treatment to it, and that is part of the work that's included here in these rates.
Okay, thank you.
The really good news here is our user fees are sufficient today in what we're charging, and that we don't need to look at a rate increase for the sewer user fee.
Okay, great.
Councilmember Breckis.
But, when you say the user fees are sufficient, my question has been longstanding is the user fees for TMWRF, are they sufficient for what we need in TMWRF in that sewer shed? And the ones instead, the assumptions, the ones that are generated instead, are they sufficient for STED? What is the cross subsidization rate paying going to each? Can you tell me that everything that's going on in the Stead expansion and that sewer shed is coming specifically from the Stead area? Or is Tumworth sewer shed paying for some of that? Yes, what is it, please?
Great question, Councilor Breckus. Again, we've talked about this. The Tumworth service area and the user fees that are collected due for repair and maintenance of the entire system.
No,
So for years, you could make an argument that Reno Stead payers have been paying for projects in Truckee Meadows. At this particular time, you would be able to say that Truckee Meadows ratepayers are paying for improvements up in North Valleys. And again, that's only on the repair and maintenance side of the user fee. All of the discussion with connection fee is all these capacity projects to build up and do improve so that the growth does pay for the growth, as Lucas has mentioned.
But I mean, my question that I just keep asking and asking again is, and I know how it is set up, but as we embark forward with the projections that we have both on the user fee and the connection fee generated in each of the sewer sheds, can you just show us, do you have the data under the work that's been done to show us what's coming out of Tumworth and what's coming out of Stead on the revenue side? Do you have those numbers divided somehow?
Councilmember Breckus, we do not break the information up by those sewer sheds of Tumworth, or Reno Stead as far as user fees, where those are being paid, nor do we break up projects by ward or by any other type of measurement per se. It doesn't mean that going forward, we couldn't look at what belongs to one certain sewer shed that goes in, but that isn't how we've accounted for things in the past. So we do not have the numbers broken up to that fine of a point, filtered down, if you will.
Okay, can we get back on track with the presentation? Mr. Tipton, I can now see, well, I can see your torso. I don't see a head. There you go. Thank you, Mr. Tipton. A little bit better. A little aim higher, and then as high as you can go.
Yep.
Too high. Almost there. Perfect.
My camera went to sleep earlier. That's why I was silent. Had to unplug.
No problem. So now you're back with us as a body and a head, and we're ready to continue with the presentation.
Well, this concludes, the user charge portion of my presentation. And John, I believe at this time, we wanted to pause and you were going to handle or discuss the public-private partnership in a little more detail.
Yes, thank you. So for the council, we have received a proposal from LDC Advisors, a private equity firm in the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. In this proposal, they are looking at North Valleys and are looking at potentially bringing in taking of the effluent. But to speak to this more clearly and to really present the overall concept to you, again, only as a concept, we have John Hester that is representing the LDC Advisors. We also have Joel Karotkin with the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. So I see that they have joined us in the meeting, and I believe John Hester was going to do the presentation. So I'll turn the time over to John Hester.
Thank you, John. Let me try to share my screen.
Mr. Hester, welcome.
Thank you. Can you all see my screen and hear me?
We can hear you, but we don't see your screen.
Okay. Perhaps, Madam Clerk, you can show the slides?
John, we'd be happy to advance them for you. We'll go ahead and pull them up.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Just so my colleagues know, we're having some reverb issues. Just make sure that if you're not speaking, that you're on mute. And I think IT has been trying to clean it up as we go along, but it's just really hard when multiple people are talking or when multiple microphones are operating at the same time.
Just so you know, we were all on mute, everyone except for John Hester.
I was sort of talking about in general.
And just to clarify, John Hester, you will be presenting the colony's presentation today, correct?
Correct.
Okay, we just want to make sure
So
that
as soon as you're ready, let me know.
just wanted to make sure that we had the right one up for you today.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So as soon as it's ready, let me know and I'll start.
Okay, we have your presentation is queued up. It is being transitioned to be able to share with council at this time. And you can just let us know whenever you'd
Okay,
like to
thank you.
advance and we'll move through.
Thank you very much. For the record, council members, I am John Hester representing a group called LDC Nevada. Joel Korotkin representing the Reno Sparks Indian Colony is also available. Next slide, please. So I want to tell you a little bit about our proposal. It's pretty straightforward as we view it, and as we've spoken with Mr. Flansburgh. The city needs a way to handle the effluent and manage the stormwater on the level of Swan Lake. The Reno Sparks Indian Colony has a new 20 some odd square miles of land, which they need a water resource for, that is adjacent to this area in a growing part of the region shown in light purple on this slide. LDC Nevada is a group, our parent group is a group called LDC that represents long-term institutional investors. And we are proposing to pay for the infrastructure to take care of the effluent and the stormwater. The reason we're doing that is because we get a long-term return on investment in that infrastructure that meets your city needs and gets the water to the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. The ratepayers wouldn't have to pay for that, cover the cost of the reservoir or other components of effluent management and for the stormwater. In return, we get the rights to that effluent and stormwater. Next slide, please. The concept, the underlying concepts in our proposal are two. I'm sure Councilwoman Doer, having been state water planner and flood agency manager, would totally understand these concepts, but we're looking at all components of the water resources, supply, wastewater, stormwater being incorporated into this approach. And we're also looking at the concept of balancing each of the basins that are affected, as you can see kind of illustrated simplistically in the equation at the bottom of that slide. Next slide. The implementation is essentially, this is a conceptual, but 4 pipelines in a trench. We would be able to import both ways. So if we took water out and the city wanted water to come back, we could bring it back. We could take it out, export effluent and stormwater through 2 pipes lower in the trench. So very straightforward, typical trench and cross section. Next slide, please. So this is the connection between the North Valleys and Lemon Valley, the preliminary route. And next slide, please. So what we're asking is that you direct your staff to work with us, with the Reno Sparks Indian Colony and LDC to further develop this option, return with a draft agreement for you to consider in 90 days. Joel and I are happy to answer any questions. And Mr. Mayor, I hope that was brief enough. I know you're pushed for time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hester. And of course, I'm just a council member, the vice mayor, but very kind of you to elevate me for the purposes of our call today. I guess I would ask, you know, you and I have spoken about this project before, and I have been someone who said that we needed a lot more information. Part of that information, I think, is where we go from today. In some ways, what interests me about the proposal is more about the unique partnership that might be created between a city and a tribe, which I think would be in many ways the first of its kind, and would also honor some tribal wishes for water sovereignty and water issues. So from my perspective, there's a very interesting thing to explore in that regard. But at the end of the day, we have some obligations to our community that are about the management of both the effluent resource and also about how it fits into the broader issue about how we're managing sewer rates, how we're managing expansion and growth, especially as it relates to North Valleys. And so all of it is to say that I'm interested in it. I just think we are at, sort of the very beginning of a very long process, and I don't know how it will turn out. I'm interested to know my colleagues' thoughts on it as well, in part because, we have Councilmember Dewar, who has, 30 years worth of experience in this area. We have Councilmember Breckus, who is a planner and therefore has a very unique experience with it. And my experience is very limited. And so I'll be interested to know what my colleagues' thoughts and comments are. Thank you for the presentation and for the information. And I'll turn it over to a couple of my colleagues who I'm sure have some thoughts. Can we start? Okay, I'm sorry. Councilmember Breckus, was that you raising your hand? I apologize.
Yeah, I bring this up probably more at this point at Tumwa than I do at Reno, maybe because we haven't done a lot of sewer stuff lately. But I'm spending a fair amount of time on the water resources plan that's out, the Tumwa Water Resources Plan. And they seem to be putting in the long-term inventory, I think, some of this effluent. And so I just, I'm having a hard time reconciling that with my Tumwa hat, because while they are being very methodical in conceptualizing it go to that purpose, I think, and I was paging through the draft plan, that they have a big acre-foot number of this effluent to be a resource. And so I'm just wondering if we set it over there for their purposes, are we then shorting Tumwa? And I've really, really been asking Tumwa to make a firm position on when they want effluent to start to be water and when it's effluent. And I think that then, frankly, needs to be a decision made before we go into some of the capital programming for the wastewater treatment facility. I think it's a fundamental decision. So that's question number one. Question number two is, are there advantages for us on this in that when it goes over to the sovereign lands, that then you don't have to go through certain NEPA procedures that you have to do on some of the other lands that are being looked at, like American Flat, for injection, because those are under BLM land? So those are two questions. I don't know if Mr. Hester can answer it, or maybe Mr. Flansburgh.
I think, Councilwoman Breckus, we have spoken with, on the first part, we've spoken with John Enlow, and he's aware of our proposal. In terms of the process on reviewing projects on the Reno Sparks Indian Colony land, I would defer that to Joel, and I know he's standing in for Scott Nabesky, so if I've given him a question he can't answer, my apologies.
Well, I'll give it a shot. I'm Joel Karatkin. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to come in and speak with you. The answer is that NEPA does apply to the lands. While it's sovereign land, we do follow the NEPA process because it's actually trust land that's held in trust for the tribe through the United States government. So it's our land, but it's our land in trust. So that's the way that works. And I do want to mention, I think, part of the genesis of why we are very interested in this public, private, and cooperative relationship stems back a little bit to the flood wall situation around Walmart. I think that together, Reno, Washoe County, the city of Sparks, the Indian Colony, and Walmart all got together to build the very first section of the flood wall through the city of Reno, and that was a very positive outcome and showed a lot of collaborative and cooperative effort. And I think that gave us the belief that we can work in a win-win situation with the local jurisdictions, and this is like the next one of those kinds of arrangements we're looking for.
Yeah, and I appreciate that from both of you, and I get it. It's just, if a private equity firm is involved, there's some, return on this, and the return, I presume, is this re-injected water that I thought Tumwa had their eyes on under the plan. Maybe Ms. Dewar has some comments, but I'm going to keep looking to see in the 2040 plan what those numbers were. Oh, and what are the acre feet we're talking about anyway for the effluent? Do we have a number on that?
I think that remains to be determined. To be honest, I think there are some commitments that the city has with regard to effluent, and there's some questions. I don't know. That's a John Hester and John Flansburgh question.
Yeah, and then the follow-up is, we don't have return flow obligations on this. This is Vidler water. What, are there return flow obligations?
A great question, Councilmember Breckus. We do not have any return flow obligations to the water in North Valleys. We are fine there. As far as the quantity of water, I'd mentioned in my initial sewer overview slides that we really have to come up with a lake management plan. So there's going to be a certain amount of effluent that, I think we're going to want to keep in, available for Swan Lake, depending on what is the lake level. We're going to want to make sure that we serve our existing customers that we have, so we have the sports complex and the golf course and, the Lakes Project now and Mayor's Park. So we have some existing commitments that we want to make sure. So it'd be the excess water. The return on investment for the LDC advisors private equity is the having control of the water. We would lose control of that water that we would turn over. So I mean, there would be a lot of things that need to go into the discussion of this option, but the proposal came to us and we wanted to make sure that council was aware, and this seemed like a good opportune time to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I get it. I think the return flow to those other customers is minimal, and I think, the obligations, and then I think also it's the reverse. The Vidler water can't be pushed down into Truckee.
Right. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Oh yes, Madam Dewar, you're on.
Okay, just a quick question. I had several of the same questions that Councilman Breckus had. Could we go back? Did you show the map again? Maybe Ms. Turney. What I was thinking is that I'm favorable to the conversation. I think it has great potential. There are similarities and differences with the project that we did with Tri-Center. So one of the differences that's to the good, in a way, is that we don't have to come backstop all of this with groundwater, water for the Truckee River. So we're allowed to do the disposal. We're allowed to take the effluent to the project without having to fill back up a Truckee River with groundwater. So it should make it cheaper. So that's one thing. We don't, on the other hand, Vidler water can't return to the Truckee River. It's not allowed to my knowledge, because of different water quality. So it has to stay up in the basin. So that's a good thing. So I think it's easier to do in some ways because it's not complicated by the whole groundwater picture. I am very interested. My key question was just first, how much? I mean, are you guys saying that you could take as much as we can provide? Do you even have a starting amount that you're asking for?
We've asked for, I think in the written proposal we gave to Mr. Flansburgh, we asked for 90%. And he said, I don't know if I can give you that much because of existing commitment.
90% of what number?
Of all the affluent.
No, but what is that, John? I mean, what are we talking about?
Oh, the total number, I think, John, was 8 million after all the expansions, 8 MGD. But he needs to keep a couple, two roughly of that. He could probably give you the better numbers than I can.
Do we have it, since it's a water use, do we have it in acre feet per chance, or thousands of acre feet, or?
We don't have, it's going to be, as I recall, and I'm using this off of the back files. I want to say it's about 1.8, excuse me, it's 4,000, well, see, 4,000 acre feet of water is equal to 3.6 million gallons a day. So we'd have to just run that back.
Well, I can do the math, but I guess what I'm trying to compare it to is, how does it compare in your mind to the Tri-Center project? They were going to take 4,000 acre feet. That's our deal, as I recall. And they said they could take up to 8,000 acre feet. Is that correct?
So they did say they could take excess. Our deal is for 4,000, and that's the upfront. And then only later would we look at maybe potential additional. On this area, when we did our build out analysis, we came up with about an 8 MGD need for sewer capacity up here. So that would be the number John's using as a full build out based on the current master planning. Obviously, in our planning to date, we're looking at up to 6 MGD for our overall wastewater planning in North Valleys. But as time goes on, through build out, we would anticipate getting up to that larger number.
Okay.
So I think all those kind of things we're talking about in the details are things we'd have to talk about. And obviously, we don't have a big control over when things are going to get developed timing wise. So we're going to build and be ready as we go. And there's obviously a lot of information that goes into this, but I appreciate that you're bringing up things that you would like to make sure that we do think about as we bring back deal.
Well, I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is just what is the water to be used for at the Reno Sparks Indian Colony project? Is it for irrigation of what? Or is it for storage?
I think that the answer is whatever answer I give is sort of premature and subject to decisions made on land use by the colony. They have this land that they've been given and that they're looking to plan for the future. And so there's a consumptive component, both residential, agricultural, and possibly in the future for some industrial and commercial development. So I think it's really to be determined, and some of that depends on how the colony makes decisions going forward. They're currently under a planning process for their Hungry Valley property. And so
they might build a town out there, and they might want to use it for potable water for people.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and they might have some green space, and they might have some farming.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Scott Nebesky, our planner, who was hoping to be here but had to be on a different call, is right now doing a master plan.
He seems to be in the waiting room, and so is Don Enlow. But
if Scott's still there, we certainly welcome him in. He's doing some long-range planning right now for Hungry Valley.
Okay, but this is the concept: is that you want a full-fledged town with a variety of uses.
I don't think a town necessarily. That would really be presumption. I mean, just the numbers alone of the colony and the residents. I don't know if town is the right term for that, to be honest. I
think they just asked for a township just south of Pyramid Lake, if I recall, for a small number of people. But anyway, some kind of a mix of uses, and you don't know how much yet. And
well, I think it's a chicken or egg too. You have to know what water you may or may not have before you can plan what you can do.
Okay. Well, anyway, I don't want to take any more time. I'm generally open to the concept. I mean, I think that but differently than the Tri-Center one, this is, as you said, a consumptive use where you would take the water, treat it to the level that you need for the use that you need, and it would really be like a wholesale water agreement, I guess, like what we did with Tri-Center. Really, because it's not coming back to us. So.
Well, we actually, at John's request, put a provision to allow some to come back if you want to.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'm open-minded to it. I mean, just like our first item, I would like to explore the possibility and see what's what. I'm totally open to that.
Okay, can I get to Councilmember Jordan, who's been patiently waiting? I also see a hand raised by Mr. Stockham, and I'm not sure what that might be about, but can we come to Councilmember Jordan?
Thank you very much. Just some general questions about kind of what the next steps may be and with what body with regards to this. Sitting on Tumwa and at the City of Reno, I find this something that's appealing and intriguing anytime we can work with the tribe as our partners on issues, significant community members that we want to always be open to what their needs are, and vice versa. I just am curious if we should choose to pursue kind of looking into this further, what the next steps would be and by whom.
Mr. Flansburgh, can you address that question very directly?
Absolutely. So primarily, we just wanted to introduce this idea, this concept that's come forward to us. We realize that there's a lot of work on both sides that's going to need to be done to oversee this. And I think that it would be great if you are interested and you're saying, no, absolutely not. We don't want to give up the water, whatever for any reason, or you say, yeah, we're interested in this, then let us work on it as staff and with everyone together. And I think Councilmember Jordan is also alluding to maybe there's a process for some involvement too from the council level prior to coming back to the full council. So, I hope I didn't presuppose what your comment was, Councilmember Jordan, but I think that's what we're looking for. Is there an interest or not?
I have a few more questions.
Hold on one second, Councilmember Breckus. Councilmember Jordan, is your question though about the connection fee issue? Because I don't even think we've gotten to that part yet. I get that you're saying, hey, it sounds like an interesting concept. Let's explore further. But I know Mr. Flansburgh's presentation was also supposed to include some discussion about the connection fee and the structure of that, because that's all ordinance-based.
Well, no, and I think some of those things would have, would have to be kind of discussed farther than today. My discussion was more on just the general sort of concept of how this could be potentially mutually beneficial if, I mean, there's much we don't know at this point, was just how we can continue to work with our, friends and partners over at the tribe on things that could benefit them and that potentially would be benefiting us, and what the next steps would be. I guess I'm trying to figure out, is this something that comes back to this body for final determination? Does it go to TMWA first? I'm kind of confused about process, I guess, on how, if we say, okay, we need more information, we need a lot more detail, what does that look like? What's the timeline, and who's on first?
Great questions, Councilmember. I would say that the next steps would be for to put in the body of work to understand what those deal points might be. In that process, I would recommend that we would certainly work closely with TMWA, as this is a water resource, and as we work closely with them on many things. We may even want to include, Washoe County in that discussion to some degree, but at the end, as far as where the decision is made, the decision probably, primarily rests right here with the Reno City Council. But I also know that you're going to want to have a fully informed decision.
Thank you. Exactly.
Okay, let me also, before I come to you, Councilmember Breckus, let me check in with Mr. Stockham, because he's had his hand raised for a long time, and I want to just make sure it's not relevant to a question you might ask. Mr. Stockham, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, council members. I just very briefly wanted to add to Mr. Flansburgh's comments that we need a Swan Lake management plan. One of the things that's real intriguing about this proposal that we would probably do independently is use this to help with water balance within the basin. So the quantities being exported, in my mind, would vary from year to year, where in a wet year when we have excess water, they would pipe more water out to store in the groundwater, and then in a dry year, they would pipe less water out. So that would really has the potential to help us with keeping the good water balance, not having too much water in Swan Lake, but not having too little water in Swan Lake. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion as kind of a key distinction from the agreement with the industrial center, where the quantities would very likely vary year to year.
Let me also ask, and Mr. Flansburgh or Mr. Stockham might be able to answer this. We've had very, very large discussions today. I don't think any of them have been laser focused, but you've heard some legitimate concerns about the costs that increase to ratepayers. You've heard about budgets being skewed and seeing dips and valleys. You've heard about, $90 million being spent over here. I'm trying to understand, as an overall project and an overall issue, this seems to greatly affect the choices that we could make on other issues, meaning they're all related. And so at the end of the day, I want to make sure that what we are doing is acknowledging that the water has value. We live in a desert, so all water has value, and that we're trying to grapple with growth projections and models. We're talking about sewer connections and rates. All of these things have essentially options and alternatives to them. And what we are tasked with as a body is trying to figure out what is the best one for our community. So in that regard, I guess, Mr. Flansburgh or Mr. Stockham, this seems to be an idea that might address some of the other problems, for lack of a better word. Is that how I should be viewing this? I mean, what is the takeaway for us at that higher level?
the very clear takeaway is that this project, by removing some of the effluent management projects in our capital program, has a direct effect on connection fees. And that's the next part of the presentation from Lucas, is to talk about those connection fees. This just, it gives you an order of magnitude, what kind of impact that has. At the same time, on the other side, you're talking about, giving up a water resource that could be used in the future in other ways. So I think it's just something that has to thoughtfully be thought through, but I think that there is a value to look at, so a benefit, and there is a cost or something that you would be giving up that has to also be looked at. And it's complicated, so we're not expecting to go to the full discussion today. It's just, is there enough interest that we should continue pursue this proposal to the next step?
Councilmember Breckus, does that satisfy some of the concerns you've raised earlier? I mean, I want to be respectful of the depth of knowledge that you've brought to the conversation, so I'm trying to really address specifically you in this question.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the steps need to even be taken a bit further on this. And, one, Mr. Flansburgh, could we see that unsolicited proposal that came? I don't think I ever received a hard copy of that. Two is, I've never heard the 8 MGD in the context of the STED plant. And that's a huge number. I think, what's TMWA at? Or TMWRF, 11, 12?
So the TMWRF plant is 40 MGD.
Okay.
The South Truckee Meadows plant, I believe, is at 6 MGD.
Okay.
Or is planned for 6 MGD plus further expansion.
Okay, so I mean, if we're talking 8 MGD, that's someone who's put an investment out there, some infrastructure on this pipeline for an 8 MGD. What is the footprint of an 8 MGD in that valley? Does that mean everything up where, I don't know, what's that area Gene Herman lives in? Palomino Valley, is that Palomino Valley? Does that include, that includes Evans Ranch going, that includes Silver Wing going, which I think is in the 4 MGD. Are there other lands, that haven't come on, like Winnemucca Ranch coming on and those? I mean, 8 MGD, at some point you need to start to think about if we're putting a water effluent disposal project up at 8 MGD, presumably you're going to have a built footprint of 8 MGD, and what does that look like? Is there any identity of common interest between this LDC Advisors and the Vidler Pipeline, Vidler Water Company, Mr. Hester?
No, LDC Advisors is a group out of Southern California. There are some. Vidler is a 50% owner in the project and manages it. There are some investors. There's one investor I know of who was originally, before Vidler bought it, involved.
Okay, because we know Vidler has, I think, 8 to 15,000 acre feet sitting up there. I had a very recent conversation with TMWA, and that's a stranded asset. They want to sell that water. So if there's some common interest of identity, I'm not saying it's conspiratorial. I'm just saying they want to, the problem to getting that water in is the effluent out, and here they are coming in on that end. That's fine. I just think that should be a very transparent point. And then the point is what does that look like on the footprint of the city of Reno, and in terms of our goals of our master plan to rebuild the core and dedicate growth there, I think is an important one. And without the information of knowing how much the subsidy from TMWRF customer base is to this STED expansion, I have a hard time, saying that this is a good idea and not working against our infill objectives. I think it is, actually, which is our most affordable housing. So there's that. And then, in terms of holdback, everything I read about all those large logistics buildings that have gone up, even some that are going up today, is that they have an obsolete life. They come obsolete. And I'm very concerned that as building technology becomes more advanced with recirculation systems, if we have some sort of obligation, I bring this up at Tumwa, we have some obligation to not allow them to reuse water internally on buildings, which is where the world is going in this future. We'll be not helping those buildings when they become obsolete, which is probably some already are, like the old, I think it was Chrysler building. So I don't know, it's worth exploring, but I think that, I think the conversation needs to be modeled up against the growth, the timing of the growth, because the last thing we want, like we've had Bidler having this development pressure to return their assets on growth, is we need another whole bit of investors who want to really pound and see return on their investment. So the North Valley's growth becomes more about investor return than the city's master plan policies on the regional forum that we've identified that we want.
Thank you, Councilmember Breakfast. Councilmember Dewar.
Yeah, just a few follow-ups. So at the conceptual level, some of the options you presented to us, John Flansburgh, were transfer to California via Long Valley. And this is better than that to me because it keeps it in Nevada. Another option that we have is building a reservoir, which is a lot of evaporation. So we have a lot of loss out of that one. So it's a very expensive reservoir and it's just evaporation of water. So it's not being put back to use. So compared to those options, I think this is good in that it's in Nevada, it reuses the water, it increases the economy. I mean, you're putting your water to work instead of evaporating it or discharging it to California. So I think already it's a better proposal than that. I am concerned about matching the demand with what's available. I mean, we're talking about doubling the size of our plant from 2 MGD to 4 MGD. And if what I'm hearing is 8 MGD need, potentially, I mean, obviously that's more than we have. And as John Flansburgh said, we have existing contracts for reclaimed water that also help keep the groundwater up. And so I know some people out there use wells, right? Just like we have the problem out at Bird Eye. So anyway, I think it's worth exploring, and it already has some things in its favor. And just to clarify, if someone said that the Reno Sparks Indian Colony project on Walmart was with Reno, actually, obviously the flood project was with Reno Sparks and Washoe County, but the project was built by the flood project, not by Reno. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I was there then, so I know that because we managed that project. So that was a great project. That was awesome. So thank you.
Okay, colleagues, Mr. Flansburgh, are we ready for a motion?
I think we could do that at the end. This was really just to introduce the concept and then to fit into the rest of the connection fee discussion so that you can see how that plays in. And then we have some questions then at the end on some policy moving forward.
Well, as I understood it, though, this was an example of a way that might affect our rate structure.
Absolutely, and you'll see what that impact is with Lucas's remaining presentation.
Okay, I understand. Now, I will warn everyone that we have colleagues who have to get off very shortly, and so to the extent that we are providing direction, I think hopefully you're hearing that direction now, and we'll see where we get to in terms of a motion that might incorporate the direction that's being given, even if a colleague should step off of the phone. We currently have a quorum, and we will for a bit longer, but not much. And so just understand that's where we are. So who is making the next portion of the presentation? Is that Mr. Tipton again?
Yes, I'd like to just jump in and thank you all for your time and your careful consideration. I really appreciate it. And
thanks, Joel. Appreciate it.
Well. Thank you.
And Mr. Nebesky, I saw was here, Mr. Hester as well, but thank you to all. Let's move this part of it along, and we'll see if Mr. Tipton, the floor is yours. Nope, we're not hearing you, Mr. Tipton. Come back to us, or I can
mute. Okay, how about, can you see my connection fee slide?
Yes, we see it.
Oh, great. And I'll try and cut out some portions to get to the end here. So our connection fee analysis was performed in conjunction with the user rate analysis and utilized the same 3 CIP alternatives for the current CIP, the RISWRF effluent bonding CIP, and the public-private partnership CIP alternative. Looking at what a connection fee can and can't be used for, connection fees are one-time charges to customers when connecting to the sewer system. They're meant to recover the cost of adding conveyance or treatment capacity for that connection based on the expected use for the capacity that either already exists or will be added in the future. It's important to note that unlike sewer usage fees, connection fees are not currently adjusted by the CPI every October. Those adjustments were ceased in 2014. And you can see that from the slide at the bottom, if those CPI adjustments were maintained, the current connection fee would be almost 20% higher today. And then all costs, I want to make a note, all costs shown in this are in 2020 dollars, and they do not incorporate any inflation or future cost projections, which is another reason of why tying your connection fees to a CPI adjustment is a good idea for utility management. Here I just had a little information on the methodology behind it. I think we can skip this. We can cover it later if needed. This table here summarizes the estimated costs associated with adding capacity over the 20 years. Remember, user fees, we looked at 10 years. Connection fees, we're looking at the full 20 years. And so these are the same alternatives. These are the costs in each specific service area. So, if you remember, alternative 1 was the current CIP or pay-as-you-go. Alternative 2 was the RISWRF effluent bonding, which included an additional $90 million in bonding for effluent projects at RISWRF. And alternative 3 was the public-private partnership.
Can I ask a question on this?
Okay, yes.
So TMWRF expansion and RISWRF expansion, I thoroughly understand as the plant, but collection expansion, is that the right phraseology? I mean, I want TMWRF collection expansion up into Island 18, but is it really not so much expansion as it is replacement of deteriorated components of the collection system?
Well, I believe in the replacement of those components, there is some upsizing going on to handle future. Yeah, and so it's the upsizing portion that's called expansion here.
But is that really true? I mean, we just had an inability to do no serves right by the pepper mill last year, and we did upsize, my understanding, right then and there. So I can see it's some upsizing, but in some areas, like here in West Reno, you have depopulated areas because household sizes in these residential areas are much smaller. I guess that's question one, and maybe it's a little nuanced, but I don't understand why the Verdi-Lawton collection expansion is separated from the TMWRF. I know there's just some debt on the Verdi interceptor, but when you say collection expansion, that is an area to grow. And my understanding is when those pipes are put in that collection system is put in the ground, it's developer paid and installed. So I'm having a really hard time understanding that difference of those two line items.
If I may, Councilmember Brackus, the collection system expansion is just like the project you mentioned where we went underneath I-580, did a bore and added a pipe through there. It's also the Mill Street interceptor. We're going to have to increase the size of the Mill Street interceptor in certain locations. And specific to Lawton Verdi, although the Lawton Verdi interceptor is in place, there are a couple segments of pipe that are east of the Lawton Verdi interceptor, but are still in that area that are going to need to be upsized as that area reaches its full capacity. So that's why they've been broken out, and they've only been broken out so we can have the discussion about an area-specific fee, which Lucas will get to.
Correct. Yes, that's why it's identified as its own line item there, is just for that second analysis. So looking at what the uniform connection fee would be for all service areas is listed on this table here, and that's estimated at $8,743 per ERU. We use the term ERU throughout this analysis as the basis for assessing connection fees. It stands for equivalent residential unit, and estimates the average flow from a residential connection to be 175 gallons per day. Over the past 5 years, we've done multiple studies in the region, and we can confirm that 175 gallons per day is a representative value to use for our community at this time. This value is important because the fees for other customer classes, commercial and industrial, or rooming houses, they're assessed against what their expected wastewater generation is, and it's kind of scaled up based on expected wastewater generated. As you can see from this table, the uniform fee is calculated by summing up the value of existing and future capacity, and then dividing that sum by the number of ERUs which can be served by the system once all projects are constructed. And as part of this analysis, we estimate that's an additional 65,000 ERUs. Our next slide shows what the uniform connection would be for all customer classes moving forward here. So here it is. It's broken out on customer class, with residential moving from 6,300 to the 8,700. In general, the fees increased by 37%, and this is for alternative 2, or the RISWRF bonding alternative. However, in 2018, Council considered an option for the multifamily connection to be consolidated into the residential, and this was based on an analysis that Far West performed that looked at wintertime water use for both single family and multifamily, and found that multifamily use was at or above that of single family water use. So moving forward in this presentation, we are going to consolidate multifamily into residential, and everything under residential, like I said, includes multifamily. So this is our first analysis, the system-wide connection fee, which would be $87.43 per ERU. Looking at connection fees based on specific areas, because the city currently provides service to customers in 3 distinct service areas, which is shown on this map. John highlighted earlier. You have the TMWRF service area shown in light pink. We broke out the Lawton Verdi to the west with the little bit darker pink, and then you have the Reno Stead in blue. And then we show the Washoe County service areas of Lemon Valley and South Truckee Meadows, because they come into play on the sewer shed realignment questions. So looking at specific service area fees, at the TMWRF calculation here, between the current condition and planned future expansion projects, it's estimated that the TMWRF service area can provide service to an additional 42,000 ERUs. And assessing this against a cost basis of $300 million, we come up with a connection fee, proposed connection fee of $7,144, which is, while approximately 12% higher than the current fee, is lower than the unified fee we saw in the previous slide. Breaking out the Lawton Verdi service area is the reason we did this is because they have some unique costs associated with them and associated with the Lawton Verdi interceptor. And so looking at what that cost basis would be, just under 40 million, but could provide service to an additional 11,429 ERUs in the Lawton Verdi service area. That would be an additional $3,400 on top of the TMWRF service fee, because Lawton Verdi does flow. Their wastewater is conveyed through the TMWRF service area and is treated at the TMWRF facility. And our final service area that we looked at specifically was the Reno Stead service area, or RISWRF. We're aware that the RISWRF service area is currently in the process of upgrading its treatment facility from 2 to 4 MGD, and the alternative to 20-year CIP, it includes upgrades all the way up to 6 MGD, including the effluent management projects, which would be required to meet an average or an annual average flow of 6 MGD. All of this results in a total cost basis of $228 million to serve an estimated 23,000 ERUs, resulting in an area-specific connection fee of $9,494. However, this service area specifically is greatly affected between whether we go with CIP Alternative 2 or Alternative 3. And so looking at this next slide shows what the area-specific fee would be for the Reno-Stead service area if the public-private partnership was pursued. And that cost would be reduced down to $6,291 per ERU, which is actually a 1% reduction from where the connection fee sits today. How that affects the uniform analysis, if we went with Alternative 3, is it lowers it down to $7,625 instead of the $8,700 shown earlier. Alternative 3 has no impact on the Tumwharf specific or the Lawton Verdi specific service area fee. Some other considerations when it comes to connection fees is that city staff's been evaluating the need to factor in house size or occupancy into the connection fee calculations and requested Far West to prepare a preliminary basis for how this could be assessed. Our analysis attempts to compare different size homes based on the expected number of people living in the home or of bedroom areas. Challenge, as we all know, the challenge in our region is that there's areas developing with small homes, which likely maybe only house 1 to 2 people, but other areas that are developing large homes with 4 or more bedrooms, and that could support, a multi-generational living condition, with some of those residences even having separate suites with kitchenettes. This analysis projects how small homes with 2 residents or a large home with 4 residents or more compared to the expected wastewater generated by the average home, which in turn scales that connection fee up or down. It's based on the flow per person. This table summarizes our findings in the connection fee portion of this analysis. The recommended service area specific fees are listed first in these 3 columns, with the uniform fee listed in the last column on the right. And just as a reminder, the residential dwelling unit class, customer class, includes single family, multifamily, mobile home estates, and mobile home parks. One other item to mention is that if it's determined that assessing the residential connection fee based on home size requires more analysis, you may also want to consider a modified rate for studio apartments. And the proposed rate would be based on the analysis discussed in the previous slide, which would assume that no more than 2 people will occupy that studio apartment because it by definition has only 1 living space. That's how we would propose to do that. So in conclusion, I think the primary considerations which John and I are presenting to you today are whether to maintain a uniform connection fee versus an area specific fee, whether to assess the residential fee based on dwelling size, and further direction on pursuing getting more information on the public-private partnership in the North Valleys. With that, I just really want to thank the opportunity to work with the city and staff on this, and open up the floor for questions or comments.
Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments at this time? Seeing none, I'll ask for, oh, Councilmember Breakfast, I'm sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, so this has been a lot today, and I think it's been so much, and I'm not really comfortable that with so much coming at us, we've been asked to make decisions today. I have to tell you, it's so complex, there's a lot to digest, and I really wish it had been framed, and I wish the council had made the decision to tee it up for another time. I really do, because I think we're moving rather speedy without understanding all the parameters, the guardrails to put on some of these decisions, and this one in particular. I do think that we need to go with the different dwelling size, because I think that's the most socially equitable and economically equitable. But I'm very concerned about pursuing that, that tier 3 and having an invested capital outlay by a private group that then on the back end, or on the front end rather, really wants to see and need growth pressures up in the North Valleys, because as they continue to do that, that comes with demands for investment in all the other services up there, namely road ones. And also, it's something that can absolutely work against our infill objectives. So I'm very uncomfortable. I had this conversation in different context earlier in the week with TMWA staff, is when you put private infrastructure investment dollars into a public utility, you get private pressure for growth and allocation of investment in different ways. And I just don't think it's right. I think it's profiteering, private profiteering off of public decision making. And it's a driver. So I'm not comfortable with going that version 3. I also really question the reason why say in the Verdi-Lawton interceptor area, we're willing to put an area fee on the connection fees, but we're not really willing to bifurcate the user fees. I think that's wrong. I think that puts the user fees into a position of being more on the capital, and that's the one thing on the capital expenses, and then the cross-subsidization into from the Truckee River Tub Wharf area up to the Stead area. And I guess, you know, that's the question is we're going to slice and dice the connection fees, but we're not going to isolate the user fees. And I've never seen in any of this presentation all along is how much user fee is paying for expansion and how much connection fee. And you know, it's not a problem to show it up. We know impact fees, residential construction tax fees. We had that discussion yesterday. Ms. Dewar said residential construction tax never pays for the park. We know connection fees aren't going to pay for the expansions. We should at least have some sort of number that we know we're going to dip into user fees, instead of just keeping those on that cost index increase.
Thank you, Councilmember Breckus. Councilmember Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I do think that we need to proceed with the discussion with the Reno Sparks Indian Colony and on that proposal. I think that we need more information, but we need a time set aside to be able to have that discussion and hear it. And then I also believe that the public needs to be a part of this discussion as well. And so for that purpose, I would say that I don't think we can make a decision right now today on the rest of the fees and what have you. I think we need more information. I think we need to have the end users be a part of the conversation as well, just to add input into what they believe needs to be in discussion. I know we have to make the final decision, and I thank my colleagues, Breckus and Dewar, because they do have a lot of experience, and I appreciate all your comments and what you're sharing. But I don't think we are ready to make a decision right now. I think we have to get a bunch more information, and we're on a time-limited basis because we may not be able to even have the rest of our council members be a part of the vote. So that's just a suggestion.
Thank you, Councilmember Dewar.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. This is a lot to chew on. You know, we've had a very full day. I thought, though, as a basic principle, I just wanted to get out there that I like the concept of the public-private partnership. I think it's worth exploring. A lot more due diligence to do there. I also want to get out as a basic principle that what we've heard from residents, not just the one-off today about this very high bill, but I really think many of them would like to tie their water use close, and their bill, rather, closer to their water use. They'd like some relationship there rather than a flat fee. And we've talked a lot about that, the expense of putting in a usage-based system, the technology cost, just the other improvements that would have to be made, metering. I mean, it took, what, 20 years to meter the Truckee Meadows to get to go from a flat fee for water to a usage-based fee. It took 20 years from the time we started till now. So I do think that we have to look at that, and I understand you're trying to approximate that. So rather than actually measure it, you're trying to come up with a proxy using house size. Another frequent, I don't think I heard this, but maybe you put it in there, often used as bathrooms, you know, fixtures or whatever it's called. So I don't know if I heard that today. I may have missed that. But I do think that the effort to go more towards a size of house and property, and really for water, it's been property, right? More water is used outside than in. For sewer, it's all inside. So I think the closer we can get to some kind of basis, some type of thing that an average customer can relate to it. I have 3 bathrooms, I have 7 bathrooms, I have 1 bathroom, and getting a rate more associated with that, I think, is to the good. And even if it does take a long time, like it did for Tumwa to put in the meters, it was a huge capital expense. It was a complicated technology issue. And then it just plain old took this, in terms of staffing, quite a while to do. And it took public acceptance as well. I think we would have an easier time with public acceptance on this one. So those are just some basic principles, but I, like my colleagues, don't feel like I'm ready to give specific direction, other than I am willing to say, let's do some more exploration and due diligence working with the Reno Sparks Indian Colony on that, because I think that alone is going to take probably 2 years to figure out. And so we might as well get started.
Okay, thank you. And we're about to lose another one of our colleagues. We've lost Councilmember Delgado. And so I just want to come to the point and find out if we're going to call for the question or table this matter. Mr. Flansburgh, how can we move forward today? You heard 3, and I'll add to that 4 colleagues who say they just don't have enough information, haven't sat with it enough. What can we do going forward today as you see it?
So I fully understand. I spent an hour and a half with the Builders Association yesterday to talk about connection fees only, just because, again, the connection fee is something that they end up paying with their developments, and want to make sure that they have that information. I think what I would recommend is that staff gets direction. We received direction to implement the next phase of the stormwater. We'll move forward with that. We received information on exploring the Washoe County and the billing. On this particular one, I would say directing staff to continue meeting with the builders to come to some maybe recommendation that can be brought back to the council in regards to connection fees, since they're the ones that pay that. Councilmember Breckus mentions over and over and over again, and I need to correct it over and over again. User fees pay for the system and rehabilitation of the system, and for treatment and operations. The connection fees are for the capacity, and that's what covers the capacity project. So when we bond against that portion of it. And then finally, if council's interested in this idea of the dwelling sites, direct staff to also look at that as we have conversations with the builders on connection fees in general. And then as far as alternative 3, I understand there is an interest, and so I think you're asking us to go ahead and pursue and continue that conversation.
Councilmember Dewar, does that address the concerns that you have today?
I think it did, actually.
Okay,
I think it's a general, broad enough way to move forward that I could support that.
Can I get a motion then, Councilmember Dewar?
Yeah, I said I could support that general direction in a motion.
Okay, I'll second that. Any additional question? It looks like Councilmember Breckus, you have your hands raised.
Yeah, since I was mentioned in the comments by Mr. Flansburgh, I wanted an opportunity to, counter that prior to the motion being made. I think that's fair enough request. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't understand. You know, I saw $14 million came in on connection fees this last year. I saw $4 million go in on expenses. So break that $14 million, you know, if I need to identify what I'm asking for in information, very specifically, isolated case study, I will, and I'll do it right now. It's $14 million. How much came in from Stead sewer area? How much came in for Tumworth area? Of that 4.8 million, where did it go into each? And then we know we took a $55 million bond. Take that, we had a payment schedule when we did that bond, but match that, marry that up to this 14 million. If it's 10 million this year coming up, then show me that it's paying that debt service, okay? Just run those numbers out. And I will say, the finance department is really the best place for a lot of these things. In many cities, you don't see public works department running the rate studies. You really see it housed in the finance department. And I think we're remiss in not tasking them with a lot of this. But secondly, I cannot support the exploration with the colony. I respect them very much, their sovereignty and so on. But when you get in the mix, a private equity firm that's going to need a return on investment, I mean, I haven't seen the proposal, but, you know, is there investment that they need us to have a sewer capacity of 8 MGD? And does that bring up the population in the North Valleys that well exceeds our consensus population in the regional plan and the city plan? That's the big question, because this does escalate up to big land use regional issues, and they're always so easily cast away when you start talking about the engineers want this or that. And I feel that we're really giving them the ability to do that, moving away from that.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Breckus. And now we have a motion. Second, I'll call for the question.
Just one moment, Mr.
Dewar.
Vice Mayor. Sorry, I'll do it just very quickly. I just want to be clear, though, with the Tri-Center Water Exportation Project out there, I mean, somebody had to pay for that. We made sure that they carried the cost of that and that there wasn't cost to our ratepayers. And I think that we would have the same kind of expectation. I just wanted to address it. I know there's a capital partner, but out there at Tri-Center, they had to pay for a lot of stuff too. And whether they got their investment from Switch, Tesla, et cetera, they still had to get the money from somewhere into the system. And I think that's sort of something that we don't have to worry so much about as long as we're kept whole and we aren't carrying those costs, then I think that's important. So
thank you.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I'll call for the question now. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay. Motion carries 4-1.
Mr. Vice Mayor, with that
Madam Clerk.
transitioning to general public comment, as was noted earlier in the meeting, Councilmember Breckus introduced public comment received by Mark Goodrich in the beginning. However, it should be noticed it was received after 4 p.m. by my office, so it is being included in general public comment at the end. With that, we have no further public comment that has come in and is registered with me, so you'd be looking for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Dewar. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Best
We are
wishes.
adjourned.
Thank you all.
you.
Bye.